Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching third and final part of What If Naruto Woke Up from a Coma with an Unknown Power. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
That night, Naruto slept in a free Yukigakure, and from Kushina's point of view, his dreams were memories while he was there. With a loud bang, the Hokage's office doors flew open, and Kushina stood at the threshold, gasping for air. Although her age in this scene was unclear, she was at least 15 years old based on the Anbu armor she was wearing and the blade that rested at her left side. Kushina. Old Torifu chastised her in a disapproving tone. Sandame. Sama comforted his old friend by raising a hand. The man appeared younger, possibly only starting to show signs of aging into his late 40s. He said, Uzumaki-san, with a calm voice and sorrowful eyes. To what do we owe the pleasure? She demanded, is it true? Knowing that at that moment she was probably the quintessential picture of a raving madwoman. She needed to know, though, because, really, what if? Is there an Uzumaki in Kirigakure? Danzo. Baka snorted, a gesture that was unusually expressive. News travels fast indeed. She snarled. Tell me, Kaharu, the hag, got up from her chair, rage etched on her face. You insolent girl. You would dare intrude upon this meeting of your betters and act in such a manner? As Kaharu and Danzo frowned, Homura, Kagami, and Torifu nodded in agreement as Sarutobi cleared his throat firmly, drawing everyone's attention to the man. We would have eventually brought this to her attention anyway, and you know this, he said. Our spies are currently searching for proof, but we do have reason to believe that a male, preteen, aged Uzumaki played a major role in an attack that cost us over 100 shinobi. 1. Startle. It's crushing. Damaging. In Kiri, another Uzumaki. With her head in her hands, the kunoichi collapsed to her knees. She didn't care about her company because she was too preoccupied with the absurdity and injustice of an Uzumaki living in Kirigakure. He serves them now after all they have done to us and all they have stolen. Then she was hateful. The vision changed, twisted, and took on a new form. After his mother's recent battle with Munashi Jinpachi, Naruto found himself back at the beach battle. Kushina said, Kazuhiko, while glaring at the shinobi across from her. His voice was indifferent. Konoha no Kusari. Takiatsu, chain cyclone of the leaf, he replied. With the intention of cutting the traitor in two, she swung the blade in her hand and brought it down in an arc as she lunged at him. Before Kushina could hit him, the younger Uzumaki quickly ducked, retreated, and withdrew his blade from his back. With chakra enveloping his blade, Kazuhiko swung it at the female redhead, determined to cut her in two. Haramekure Kaiho, Haramekure release, he exclaimed. Cleanly avoiding the male, Kushina leapt above him and slashed his head. In order to swing around and hit Kushina's side, the younger rolled sideways and jumped upward. In order to evade Kazuhiko's counterattack, the Konoha.nin leaned backwards, avoiding the blade by a narrow margin, and instantly used a Shunshin no Jutsu, body flicker technique. A twisted maneuver that left him with only his Haramekure for support. Using the blade's special ability to lengthen, Kushina spread her kusanagi in one hand and sent the sharp edge hurtling quickly in the direction of the younger Uzumaki. With a chant of, Haramekure no Tate, shield of the twin sword, the Kiri.nin deflected the attack while holding his blade flat in front of him. In contrast to Shibuki, his companion Jinpachi's blade, Haramekure was unharmed by the kusanagi no Tsurugi's contact. She questioned angrily, why do you fight for Kiri, Kazuhiko? Why fight for those who destroyed your home? Kushina's blade returned to its original shape, and his cold black eyes met his own. Kirigakure is my home, he declared, unconcerned. He growled, then die, traitor, Kushina said. With her blade raised in her right hand, Kushina sprang at the enemy nin, summoning 4 lengths of kusari from around her left arm. In a chorus of clattering steel, Kazuhiko's sword collided with her twisting, poisoned blade. With the glory of combat coursing through her veins, she thought, swipe, dodge, kick, chain strike, kneel, roll, parry, trip, swing. Vengeance, my dear revenge. As the wind changed direction, her distant relative dodged and parried in return, changing the shape of his blade. A set of twin daggers, a huge katana, a club, and a hammer. Hatred and malice met icy determination and boredom as they repeatedly struck at one another. And Kazuhiko didn't blink once during the fight. He never cringed or winced. His eyes were devoid of anger, his jabs were cruel, and his counters were filled with desperate rage. It made Kushina crazy. A Uzumaki. and Uzumaki, employed by the village that destroyed them, Kiri. Her only hope for her people's potential survival, the first Uzumaki she had seen since Mito's death, was squandered on this pitiful, broken shell of a person. She thought mockingly, slave, puppet, toy, a toy. She lacked the self-control to even hold the Mizukage responsible. The Uzumaki ought to have been smarter, stronger, and more capable than to undermine Kiri's structure. Instead of fighting for the village that destroyed them, this child should have been a proud shinobi of Uzushiogakure. Something else, something more, replaced the raging, righteous rage in her. She knew the Kyubi. She sensed. She gained strength from its fury, strength she had never employed in combat before. She didn't have to, however, now. Kazuhiko possessed strength. Deadly. She had a cut on her side, a twisted ankle from a bad fall, and other wounds from their dancing. She also had wounds from her fight with the evil Kirigakure no Nikuya, Butcher of the Hidden Mist, which caused her to slow down. However, the Kyubi's strength, fueled by her anger, might yet turn the tide of this battle in her favor. Her veins were filled with power. Horrible, blazing, all-pervading anger, with the intensity of a fire and the unrelenting flow of smoke, gushed out of the Uzumaki woman, who reveled in her strength and swung at her enemy. Her actions were no longer planned. All Kushina knew was death, killing, and the moment's glory as her wounds melted shut, her blood that had been leaking vanished, and her ligaments snapped back into place. The younger Uzumaki stumbled at her blood-red, savage eyes, the whisker lines that burned like wildfire across her cheeks, and the claws that grasped her weapon where her hands had been. Kazuhiko had experienced fear for the first time in a long time. The Jinchuriki rained blow after blow on her unwary relative with the boiling, white-hot ferocity of 100 dying suns. Blades, chains, and claws were occasionally used to kill, maim, and destroy the younger redhead. He returned the blows, but Hiramekure was unable to withstand Kushina's blade, which was fueled by the fox's strength. Kazuhiko only recoiled when his wrists were sliced, and his twin sword fell to the ground, useless, according to his own merit. Once again, Kushina was the final Uzumaki as her blade slid smoothly down his spine, slicing the traitor in two neat halves. The genin joined the film crew in celebrating their success by eating and having a good time on the ship's deck during the return trip from Yuki no Kuni, land of snow. The night was cloudy, cool, and dark. The ship was being driven forward by a strong north wind, and the sailors were having difficulty keeping it on course. The genin, for the most part, conversed with the film crew while the jonin sensei all shared stories with the sailors. The director smiled and said, "Do you shinobi have any myths? Any crazy legends about your clans and such? Any wacky old stories passed down?" Sasuke gave a snort. As he whispered, "The battle at the Shimatsu no Tani, Valley of the End, comes to mind." The other genin gave a nod. The director exclaimed, What's the story of that?" Sasuke gave a shrug. Nobody really knows, except that Uchiha Madara attacked Senju Hashirama there. The battle was something straight out of the epics, supposedly." "How epic?" the man exclaimed, deeply enthralled. Naruto remarked, "Epic enough that the valley didn't exist before their battle," to which the other genin responded with laughter. What else? Naruto lied when he said, "I don't really know anything else." Naturally, Mito had actually been there, but Naruto hadn't yet had any vivid memories of it. Or really, any other recollections from Mito of Madara. Not much is known about the battle. Shodai Sama carried the secrets of the battle to his grave. After giving a pitiful pout, the man turned to face the other genin. Come on, you guys got nothing?" "My clan have an old story," Ino said slowly. "According to legend, a powerful being who lived after the Rakudo Sennin, sage of 6 paths, but was just as powerful as him once roamed the earth and gave families unfathomable powers as they did so. The Yamanaka believe this is how Kekkei Genkai originated. They once encountered a man and his spouse, who were ordinary farmers who were being terrorized by the local guardsmen who served an oppressive lord. They accepted the being's offer of protection, and as a result, they were given the chakra sensory ability. The being left them after that, and the couple used their techniques to hide away from those who meant them harm. The wife of the two was especially gifted, and could sense their attackers coming from miles away. As time passed, they decided to start a family. But the pregnancy was hard on the woman, who died in childbirth, for she bore not 1 baby, or even 2, but 8. Then Kiba said, 8? That's bullshit. Ino gave an eye roll. The Inuzuka snorted in mockery, to which she gave him a lewd hand gesture before continuing, "Whatever you say, dog." Breath. All I know is that whenever the Yamanaka start doubting that part of the story, another powerful member of the clan is born, who bears octuplets again. Those 8 went off and married other families, who gained their skills and became sensory.nin. The Yamanaka are supposedly descended from the eldest of the 8, who was the most powerful of them. That's why every last Yamanaka is a censor type. The director muttered, "Interesting, interesting," after taking out a notebook and beginning to take notes. Any other tales? After a brief pause, Naruto started. The Uzumaki were a long-lived clan, both in lifespan and in history. Supposedly, in the distant past noble families existed which held dominion over vast swaths of land. These families were in constant conflict, a violent dance of death and betrayal spanning generations. A woman, the daughter of one of these families, ran away rather than continue the violence. The film crew and genin gathered around the blonde with interest. To begin a new life, she fled to an island where no kingdom claimed it. She spent years there swimming, fishing, and making friends with the locals, who mocked the ongoing conflict. However, one day she got caught in a strong eddy while swimming, and no one from the town was close enough to save her. Abruptly, a man showed up. After plunging into the water, he dragged her out and revived her lungs. He acknowledged that, like her, he had fled the ongoing conflict and hoped to start a new life when she woke up from her near-death experience. They eventually discovered that together, and they gave themselves a new family name, adopting the name of the thing that united them. Uzumaki, Naruto thought, grinning a little. Whirlpool. Some claim that it was his breath that gifted the Uzumaki with such great lifespans, he said. But that's too fantastical to be true. What happened to them? Hinata inquired quietly. Who knows? The Uzumaki shrugged. Some people claimed to have had a happy ending, while others denied it. What are the chances that they ever existed, though? Sasuke turned to the blonde and drew in a breath to say something, and Naruto nearly sighed. After the whole, abducted by Yuki.nin, shebang, his cousin had been mothering him like nothing on earth, and it was becoming vaguely frustrating. The other genin nodded, and there was a moment of silence. But before the raven could say anything, the sailor's commotion broke the stillness. The following moments could only be described as chaos, and Naruto was unable to fully understand what was happening as a loud crashing noise pierced the night. People were running everywhere, shouting, and the shinobi were bracing themselves while the civilians panicked. The ship span, slowly in a circle, as the distressed sailors tried to regain control of the ship. The ship ran aground with a dull thunk and a groan of wood. Wonderful. Sasuke concluded that the subsequent dark trek across this landmass was the worst part of the entire shipwreck situation. Torches only illuminated so much, and strange cries resounded throughout the night, and Sasuke had tripped over a tree root more than once. They had no idea where they were, even though the island, it had to be, given their vague heading and location, was densely forested. From the shore, they had a vague impression of a mountain set before them, but none of the weak light of the waning moon could reach through the canopy here. Kakashi and Asuma had stayed behind with the sailors, and Kurenai was organizing with Ino, Shoji, and Kiba to set up a camp for the night. They had been sent out in 3 teams of 2, Naruto with Shino, Sakura with Hinata, and Sasuke with Shikamaru, to search the landmass for any signs of life. From behind the Uchiha came a dull thud, and a low mutter of, troublesome, caused Sasuke to roll his eyes and turn to look at the fallen Nara, who was lying flat on his face, groaning, and spread eagle on the forest floor. Why couldn't they have just kept the boat straight? With a snort of agreement, Sasuke reached down and lifted the stunned clan heir, saying, "Come on. I will not allow the other teams to surpass us." Sasuke held a hand over his torch, not daring to make a sound by clicking it off, leaving the Nara for a moment with muffled exclamations before they both fell completely silent at the snap of a twig from the nearby forest. Even for a shinobi, this was dark, and the 2 genin turned to their other senses, especially their hearing, standing motionless and listening for any sound that might be able to penetrate the dense forest canopy in the cloudy night. Only a small amount of moonlight was able to illuminate the landscape, dulling sight to non-existent levels. One more moment of the rustling of leaves and branches was followed by Shikamaru's urgent whisper, "It isn't wind." Sasuke barely had time to react before a huge, hulking snake twisted and turned through the trees, eagerly hunting for the kill. "Danger," the hive whispered, "attackers." "Other." Shino exchanged a quick glance with the Uzumaki after hearing a girlish scream, either from Haruno or Hyuga, coming from the far west. With a grim expression that briefly flashed across his face, Shino calmed the swarm with a resolute acknowledgement. He felt a strange protectiveness that was unheard of in people outside the clan. He knew these people, had trained and fought alongside them, and thought them important, if different, strange, and sometimes nonsensical. Different. Incapable of comprehension, the hive reminded them needlessly. Speaking softly to the Uzumaki as they ran, the Aburame calmed the swarm once more, saying, "There are multiple enemies, and some are of insectoid species. This is a difficult and constant battle more than anything else. You might wonder how I know this," he said. "My Kakaichu have warned me so," and the Uzumaki gave a nod. "What are your chances of persuading them to depart amicably?" Quietly, the other asked, glancing briefly at his stoic companion before turning back to the trees in front of them. "Wise," the hive said. "Without doubt. Change." Shino had also noticed the significant difference in Uzumaki, but he knew why. The Aburame was glad he knew the reason, because it would be unsettling, to put it mildly, for a person as deeply rooted in logic and fact as he was. Minor. Since no Aburame is familiar with this island, its residents are also unfamiliar with Aburame. As a result, I have little chance of calming the animals. There was no time for more words because one of the creatures, a giant centipede, blasted out of the undergrowth, and the two genin ducked to the sides. Uzumaki sprang into action right away, launching a flurry of kunai at their attacker as a distraction, even as he wavered through hand signs for a jutsu. Shino mirrored the blonde, getting ready for his own jutsu. Futon. Kazikiri no jutsu, wind release, wind cutter technique, was uttered, and the creature was battered from both sides by wind blades, but it was not rendered inoperable. Armor, the hive insisted, unbreakable, even as Shino and Uzumaki exchanged glances. Then, another attack came at the Aburame, and he ducked in a neat leap that, although it left him temporarily exposed, confused the creature, which curled around itself, startled and looking for its missing prey. Uzumaki then launched another attack at the creature, calling forth his Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains, in an attempt to run it through. Perhaps it would have been successful, if the centipede had not curled away in a different direction. Shepherd, the hive said, but Shino was already moving, throwing kunai to guide the creature in certain patterns of movement. Uzumaki swiftly realized, remembering his kusari to attack once more, but his command of the technique faltered and broke, leaving the creature unharmed as the blonde cursed. Shino winced faintly as the creature crushed some of his insects, the hive buzzing in agitation at the danger, while his blonde companion was searching through pockets, finally rang out a fuinjutsu sheet and briefly scanned it for flaws. A wave of kakaichu launched towards the centipede, gnawing, biting, and buzzing to divert its attention from the defenseless Uzumaki. The hive screamed, dying. "Hurry!" The Aburame was momentarily trapped, unable to effectively dodge the unexpected attack, as the beast turned in frustration towards Shino, intending to attack a more stationary target. Sealing art. Paralysis seal, fuinjutsu. Mahi Fuin, with a sheet of sealing paper in his hand, Uzumaki yelled. There was a flash, and the centipede trembled once, then froze. The creature's momentum, however, propelled it straight toward Shino. If the hive had previously screamed, it now shrieked and screamed, a wordless sound reverberating in his mind as innumerable insects were crushed beneath the beast. After a flash of red-hot chakra ran along the katana Uzumaki carried, the centipede was neatly halved, and Shino was released from under its carapace. With his blade in hand and his red chakra fading, Naruto let out a ragged breath. "You okay, Shino?" "I think I might have cracked a rib," Shino confessed, placing a hand momentarily against his chest. "Broken," the hive said ineffectively, as the dark-haired nin nearly sighed and the Aburame nodded slowly, his swarm assembling around him in a tightly protective formation. "I don't know how to heal that," Uzumaki said, flinching. He unwrapped a bandage from its binding around his leg and said, "Here, take this to bind your chest. You know, we should find the girls. They'll know how to handle it." Shino nodded, and they left for the canopy. There are creatures everywhere. She had long ordered a retreat to the beach, with the genin following her as they ran for help, but the things that attacked them were too fast, too many for them to get far. She had already thrown a Kaiden ninjutsu into the sky, her only hope that someone had noticed it. A variety of strangeness had spewed out of the night, crashing and galloping through the trees as they tried to make camp. Flickering through hand signs for her strongest genjutsu, Kurenai's span, but as with the last time they saw it, nothing happened, and she cursed. As big as a horse but in the shape of a snail, the creature was stocky, and the only reason she did not call it a snail was because of how quickly it followed them, its beady eye stalks carefully following their movements. Ino was attacked by the creature in a subtle way while the kunoichi watched, and the last of the Yuhi family launched herself at the downed girl, scooping her into her arms in a fluid movement as she continued to run. Akamaru and Choji, who were only a few meters away, struggled to drag an unconscious Kiba out of the way as the snail sped past them at an absolutely ridiculous rate. If it weren't for the dire circumstances, she might have chuckled at the sight of the small pup making a heroic effort to drag his companion out of the way. The genin didn't have reserves to throw around high-level ninjutsu yet, which is why he failed. He'd knocked himself out from chakra exhaustion. The Inuzuka's technique, a Kaiden ninjutsu that had smeared the creature's shell in soot but didn't kill it, had simply lacked the power, she reasoned. However, it had inspired her. Kurenai spared a glance for the Yamanaka heiress in her arms, and a moment later saw the telltale signs of a genjutsu. Great, she thought, perhaps a little uncharitably, it's immune to genjutsu because it uses genjutsu. A summons, then, and a powerful one at that. Although, she thought, looking at toppled trees and shredded stumps, perhaps it likes brute force, too. The girl was successfully awakened by her burst of chakra, and Kurenai ducked another physical charge from the creature and kept the chakra flowing as Ino shook her head in a daze. That won't last either, the woman thought, again taking into account the uprooted trees strewn across what was now an impromptu clearing, as she watched the other genin stumble momentarily under Kiba's weight and struggle to move the Inuzuka onto a branch. Kurenai changed her hold on the blonde to a one-armed one, similar to a fireman's carry, and with a flick of her wrist, she fetched a kunai with a flash bomb out of her pocket, sending it flying towards the creature, which stopped moving as the flash went off, its sharp eyesight momentarily dulled by the intense light. As Kurenai turned to face the stunned creature, she thought, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Her Kaiden. Karyu Enden, fire release. Fire dragon flame bullet. Exploded from between her lips. The roaring dragon flame of the ninjutsu imbued with much of her remaining chakra in a desperate attempt to kill the snail. She had never been so thankful for developing specific skills before, as she executed flawless one-handed hand seals for an elemental ninjutsu. Kurenai staggered, the weight of the nearly awake Ino falling from her shoulder as her body gave out, the effort of the Karyu Enden leaving her physically weak, and she heard Choji call her name as she fell to her knees, momentarily spent. Burning, the smell of cooking flesh, and when the fire died down, the creature was nothing but smoke and ash. Perhaps, the Yuhi thought, ninjutsu is just not for me. If only she had been born with the vast reserves of Tsunade Sama, the deep reserves of her old friend Rin, or even the respectable reserves of young Ino or Hinata. However, she did not have a natural chakra pool large enough to throw around the high-end ninjutsu Asuma and Kakashi played with. Kurenai had only gained as much as she had, low Jonin level, through years of cultivation, and she had just expended the majority of it on one desperate technique. Anyway, there was nothing left to do. She moaned as she stood up again after hearing a strange bird call and another crash in the night. Fucking hell. The white snake behind him froze abruptly, and Sasuke skidded to a stop, panting. Why did it take you so long? Darkness envelops the entire island. I needed to know exactly where it was and manipulate a specific shadow. Tendril, said the creature, letting out a muffled sigh. I can't just rule all night long. As Shikamaru huffed a breath, the Uchiha rolled his eyes and swung his blade around to cleanly decapitate the snake, letting its body hit the floor a moment later. Now. In any case. Let us locate the others. Shikamaru muttered, troublesome, and then he left in an arbitrary direction, saying, they're this way, Sasuke. Sasuke lamented the loss of Ino for the first time in his life, saying, with any luck Naruto's sensory talents will hold out. The Uchiha nodded, not questioning that the Nara had accurately triangulated which vicinity the others were in, and he likely already had a specific search zone in the back of his mind, ready to be explored in search of the other genin. Sasuke believed they had been moving farther inland when the forest around them broke and gave way to a deep valley with red stone promontories on either side. That snake, the Uchiha scowled, where did it come from? Without altering his gait, Shikamaru snorted, it was most likely a summons. This indicates a connection to Sanin Orochimaru, the snake. Suffice it to say, not even Kakashi is up to fighting a Sanin. Sasuke hissed out, his fears confirmed. We need to move quickly, Shikamaru said, nodding in a way that was unfamiliar to those who knew him. I wouldn't send you back if I thought we could risk being parted, but I don't trust you to get to the beach by yourself, and I don't trust myself to avoid getting bitten by another snake. A scream in the darkness interrupted Sasuke's scathing reply, which went something like, he could find his way back, and how dare that fool insinuate otherwise. They exchanged a glance in the dim torchlight before running in the general direction, atop the plateau. 5 minutes later, they arrived to discover Sakura throwing kunai at a creature deep in the valley that resembled a Komodo dragon. While Hinata lay prone, trapped in the creature's long tongue. As the two genin watched, kunai bounced off the fleshy appendage, making Sakura's attempts to attack the beast futile. Sasuke and Shikamaru nodded, and while his companion threw two kunai with a length of wire attached, sending them colliding in mid-air and wrapping around the tongue, Sasuke sent a kaiden. Hosenka no Jutsu, fire release. Phoenix fire technique, along the wire, burning the tongue just in time to prevent the creature from swallowing the Hyuga heiress whole. The Nara executed a hand seal in an effort to subdue the beast once more. When Shikamaru successfully bound the creature with a Kagemane, the dark blue creature screamed in agony and staggered backwards on four short legs, leaving Hinata to fall to the ground, forgotten. The Uchiha took the unconscious girl in his arms and called for Sakura to follow him back up to the promontory. Sakura called down a Doden. Ganseki Kuzushi, earth release. Rock collapse, on the creature, crushing and killing it beneath an avalanche of broken rocks as Sasuke caught Sakura nodding to Shikamaru out of his peripheral vision as Hinata stirred feebly. The Nara then released his technique, but the creature had no time to attack. Sakura hurried to him and Hinata as the Uchiha watched the Nara slump, completely depleted of chakra. Naruto and Shino then arrived, and Sasuke approached them while the Pinkette fussed over the Hyuga. "We heard the screams," Naruto said without reason. "Is everything all right?" Sasuke told the two newcomers, as good as it can be, and explained their predicament. "You?" He looked around them for injuries, but he couldn't see anything. "Nah, we're good, aside from Shino's cracked rib. Hinata has been hit by some sort of paralytic poison," Sakura said, her frown evident in her voice as she attempted to heal her fellow genin. "It is extremely virulent. She could have perished if we hadn't managed to get the creature to drop her at the right moment." "A creature?" Silently, Shino interrupted. "What kind of creature?" "Like a summons," Shikamaru said, referring to the enormous lizard that resembled a Komodo dragon in appearance. "Had a very annoying tongue." "We also had a massive snake to deal with," Sasuke said. "We thought it was something to do with Orochimaru of the Sannin, but with this other creature too." "Creatures," Shino remarked. "We had a huge centipede, surprisingly agile, hardened carapace." "What the heck? We have an island full of enormous creatures," inquired Naruto. "Likely summoning creatures, changed to, nothing of this caliber exists that doesn't have a contract." Sakura said, "But that would mean we have a Sannin to deal with," in a terrified tone. Another creature, a giant spider, rushed the genin, walking on long legs out of the tree line with its fangs gleaming sick venom in the dappled torchlight. Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and Shino tensed, placing themselves between the sickened Shikamaru and the unconscious Hinata. Sasuke launched a kaiden. Hosenka no Jutsu in the spider's direction, its piercing light piercing the night. Naruto and Shino added a futon. Daitopa, wind release. Great breakthrough, as a precaution, the two techniques combining into a searing conflagration. They were excellent at igniting a forest fire. The creature was not even slowed down. Before the technique failed, Sakura slumped forward, unconscious, and Shino picked her up in his arms to carry her away from the attacking creature. Sakura attempted to pull the ground out from under the creature, but her Doden ninjutsu were underpowered because of her own steadily diminishing chakra reserves. Shikamaru, who was leaning heavily against a tree behind them, had an epiphany. "The mountains! Run toward the mountains!" the Nara yelled. Together, the two cousins and Shino carried the three weaker genin up the mountain, the vicious summons hot on their heels, while more creatures around them let out haunting cries in the night. Naruto nodded to Sasuke, who was running for Shikamaru and the latter for Hinata. The three ran faster. To the left, the Aburame panted, "My Kakaichu have found what appears to be a passage built into the mountain." They ran onwards and upwards, but their strength quickly faltered due to their heavy burdens, with Shino in particular, not using taijutsu, falling slightly behind. It would be a location that could be readily defended. "How much web does this spider have?" Sasuke rolled to the side, Hinata safe in his arms, and was half tempted to scream in frustration as Naruto nodded and they turned in that direction, running ever faster. For several minutes, the three genin dodged attacks from the creatures behind them. It was amazing, really, to be related to someone who was skilled in fuinjutsu. The final Uchiha span, throwing kunai with explosive tags attached, erupted in smoke and flame down the mountain behind them. The nighttime cries turned to wails, and Sasuke grinned. After a few moments, they arrived, with Shino quickly and accurately turning the handle of a big metal door. The Aburame pulled, and the door opened, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The three genin hurried inside, slamming the steel door shut just in time, as a loud crash echoed around them as one of the creatures struck it. A single, main hall led further into the mountain, curved to the sides after about a dozen exits, and the halls were lined with light green tiles, leading down several corridors away from them. "Well, what the hell is this?" cried Naruto, bewildered. "Some sort of research facility," Shino guessed. "You might wonder how I know. The building has a rather Spartan layout and design, with lengthy corridors and meticulously tiled and maintained spaces. Hospitals and labs are the main locations for this kind of design." An inexplicable thought was gnawing at the back of Naruto's mind, arguing that Shino was mistaken and that he knew what this was and had been here before. Memories of either Kushina or Mito, he couldn't tell which one it was, came to mind, but he was unable to interpret them and shook his head wearily. "And there's no need for a random hospital out here," Shikamaru said, nodding wearily from where Naruto had placed him. "Additionally, if we were in a research facility, it would explain the origins of the creatures." "Well, there's no way we're going back that way," Naruto said, gesturing toward the hazy entrance. As he was saying this, a creature hurled itself at the door, causing a moaning sound to reverberate through the corridors. Moving forward? Like a wave, fury rose in her, rich and bottomless, and tinged with indignant disbelief. She growled, "I have tolerated many of your experiments, Sukuda-san. You have committed crimes against nature, and I have done nothing about it. However, this is incomparable. My orders from Mizukage Sama are clear." The man who was against her sighed sorrowfully, as though her rage was a personal injury that deeply troubled him. "For Kirigakure, we have been tasked with creating new summoning creatures. And we've done it." The woman could only feel disgust as his arms spread wide and a burning passion flared in his eyes. "We have created the Kyukyoku no Kachiyosiju, ultimate summoning beast. That chimera, that monstrosity, it would kill them all. You have created an abomination," she exclaimed, her bile rising in her throat. "Something that can't be stopped." "So you admit it," Sukuda grinned and said, "We've succeeded. We can eliminate the bloodline freaks with this. Think, Hinoka-san." His sultry smile revealed a blatant hatred she had not yet sensed in him. "The clans that exterminated your ancestors. We could murder them all." "What is the price?" she screamed. "Our humanity. Innumerable innocent lives." "Hinoka-san, I had no idea that this was how you felt about our work here," Sukuda said, glaring at her with a stung expression. "If I had known better, I would not have saved you from that shipwreck." His eyes darkened, and his tongue grew piercing as he spoke of our fight against impurity. Her chikuto, straight sword, engraved with seals upon seals, came into her hand with a pulse of chakra, and she thrust it forth, even as the man made an attempt to dodge, her blade cutting cleanly into his heart, impaling the lead scientist and killing him instantly. She snarled, lashing out at the man as she saw that he had long abandoned all rationality. Her dislike for this man and his actions overrode her senses for a brief moment, but it was enough. "Ah well, nothing to be done now. I need to stop them from finishing the process of birthing the creature," she thought, frowning as she drew back her blade and walked around the man's bloody corpse before turning to face the main laboratory, where the creature was growing. Chakra pumped through her legs as she dashed towards the chamber, hoping against hope that she would arrive in time to use her sealing techniques to confine the beast, her deep red hair trailing behind her in its ponytail as she used all of her considerable speed to quicken her pace. "No contact with the outside world," he had insisted, "too dangerous. I take all messages back to Mizu no Kuni, land of water." Hinoka had, like the unintentional Konoha team approaching her, been caught in a whirlpool on a boat, her ship and its crew all killed in the subsequent wreck. Sukuda-san had discovered her unconscious on a piece of driftwood. Fortunately, he was unaware of her true identity, and he had given her the ideal opportunity. She had been here for 3 months, acting as an impromptu spy for the rebellion among Yagura's loyalists. The devastation and the disasters they could have caused here if she hadn't come were unthinkable. But no, she thought, frowning, the ancient Fuinjutsu and Kekai ninjutsu, barrier techniques, would have stopped them. Sukuda had considered it a miracle that one of her clan had come here to figure out how to take down the barriers, but it was well beyond a seal mistress's meager abilities. Nevertheless, she couldn't risk such experiments going on elsewhere, or the possibility that they would discover a gap in the ancient defenses. She ran faster as screams reverberated down the hallway. As they stalked the facility's corridors, they heard screams. Maintained, Shino had said, and Shikamaru had alluded to the island they were on being probably outside sovereign territory, making it ideal for secret facilities. After that, they would tread much more carefully. However, all of them abruptly stopped, with the awakened Hinata pointing down one of the nearby hallways and flaring her Byakugan once more to survey their surroundings. "There's P. People down there, with s.some.th. Thing. Her voice stumbled back into her sudden fear, and a sluggish Sakura gave her a questioning glance. Is there something you mean? Shikamaru said. As she said, I circa can't D. Desk. Crybit. T. Her voice was tight with horror. Down the hall, there was another scream. It's killing them, muttered Sakura. We can't just leave them, said the blonde Uzumaki, sighing as he looked at the other genin before turning and sprinting ahead. Hurry up. As they sprinted in the direction of the creature, the genin kept up with the blonde. You're going to kill us all, Sasuke growled. What, not able to handle the challenge of an enigmatic creature whose nature we do not know? Naruto smiled as he parried. Without altering his gait, the Uchiha rolled his eyes and said, Idiot. The Jinchuriki chuckled, then heard another scream echoing down the corridor, and after running for a brief moment more, they emerged into a huge room with cut stone walls and more tiling on the floor, and a raised platform with railings on one side of the room. The great beast that occupied a large portion of the room, however, was more significant than the room's layout or the way the memories were whispering to Naruto once more. It was white and had a large body mass, from which tentacles and small arms writhed and twitched. It was supported by 4 small, stubby legs, which held its hulking form up. Its eyes were squinted shut, and its mouth was a gaping maw that, even as they watched, swallowed a shinobi whole. In an attempt to ensnare and bind the beast, a girl was on the ground in front of it, her pulsing fuinjutsu stretching forth like flowers to the sun. Naruto was already running, his sensory abilities reaching out and recognizing the beast's strength, far beyond what the girl was producing, and he was almost to her even as the branching fuinjutsu snapped, dissolved. Naruto summoned a Kusari to fight the limb as the creature lowered a tentacle in her direction. The girl screamed, Oh God, someone, please. The creature tossed it aside like leaves in the wind, pulling on his reserves and the chain vanishing, indicating it had absorbed the technique. Please save me. Since it was never in Uzumaki Naruto's character to disappoint someone, the blonde was forced to follow his gut. Through a haze of exhaustion, Sakura watched as Hinata leapt up onto the edge of the raised platform, looking stern-faced and confident, while Naruto carried the red-headed girl down, protecting her with his body and barely avoiding the tentacle as it struck at them again. She uttered the words, Sweeten. Mizu Shuriken, Water Release, Water Shuriken, and water sprang from the elevated platform and shot in the direction of the creature in the form of a hail of kunai. They barely scratched it, and my goodness, its blood was green, but they were able to divert it long enough for Naruto and the girl to return to the other Konoha.nin. The Haruno weighed the pros and cons of recommending that they escape into the tunnels from which they came, but they realized that the creature would just chase them and probably bring the entire complex down on top of them. However, the Nara shook his head, and the clones scattered into a cloud of Kakaichu, which launched themselves at the creature. Shino, who was carrying her, leapt up to join Hinata at the high ground, watching the girl as she continued to launch shuriken of water at the creature. Shino formed a Mushi Bunshin, insect clone, as she watched, reaching to collect Shikamaru. Naruto. I need you to divert it, cried Shikamaru. Buy us some time and keep it occupied. He pointed to the kunoichi he had saved and said, Your friend there can help. The blonde and the red-haired girl exchanged a brief look before nodding and turning to the creature to perform hand seals. As the other genin hurled weapons and techniques at the creature, the Nara began to limp around the room, surveying their surroundings while peering into a side tunnel that appeared to be completely cut out of rock. When the beast swung a tentacle at Sasuke, she turned back to the fight. The genin dodged cleanly, but another tentacle followed and attempted to catch him in midair. The Uchiha was unable to dodge, and just as Sakura was about to scream in shock, Hinata yelled, Sweeten. Suijinheki, water release. Water formation wall, and deflected the blow with a wall of water. The wall held for a few seconds, but the Hyuga girl lost control of such a huge amount of water, and she slumped over in shock as her technique failed. With startling clarity, the Haruno realized that the beast was silent, that it made no noise, that it made no fuss except when it was in pain, and that it struck with precise, practiced attacks. It was a horror, something straight out of hell, and her fear grew. A pained shout from Naruto diverted Sakura's attention, and she watched in horror as the Uzumaki was flung across the room by a tentacle strike, hitting the wall with a sickening snap of bone that reverberated throughout the room. She felt Shino turn worryingly towards the blonde, but he clearly reconsidered the move as the whiskered Jinchuriki stumbled to his feet while clutching his left shoulder. Even as she watched, he put it right with a particularly nasty movement and a shout of pain. Dislocated, she was told by her mediocre talent as an Irio.nin. Then, with triumph rather than pain, the girl he had previously rescued yelled, "Sweden! Daibakufu no Jutsu, water release. Great waterfall technique." The one Shikamaru was looking at, she cried, and Sakura was somewhat alarmed as a massive wave of water erupted from the elevated tank and rushed in the direction of the creature, washing it down the much wider passageway that was carved out of the stone. "Hey," the redhead smiled, "I knew why I concentrated on mastering a single elemental ninjutsu, you know?" Sakura looked at the girl in confusion as she blinked and covered her mouth with her hand. As Shikamaru cleared his throat during the brief pause, the pinkette's focus shifted to him. His voice was loud and full of urgency, and even Naruto and Sasuke, who had hurried to his side right away, she observed, could hear the Nara as he spoke. "Quickly. We must push it down that hallway." "You're Sweden-natured?" he asked sharply, turning to face the red-haired girl. At her nod, he sighed and called across to the two approaching genin. "Sasuke, have you previously witnessed a Doden ninjutsu performed by Sakura or Choji using your Sharingan?" Sakura's attention was diverted when Sasuke made an affirmative sound and the resident genius led them all down the hallway while yelling as he ran, "I need you to manipulate the ground underneath it." The girl was looking at them curiously, pointing out Naruto in particular. "Make it slide down the hallway more." They ran, Shino carrying her, and she saw that something red and fiery was burning at the end of the hall. Lava, she realized, an open caldera with a path reaching into the main chamber. The mountain was a volcano, and she smiled as Shikamaru's plan suddenly revealed itself to her. Even though the beast was near the entrance, she watched as Naruto and a group of Kage Bunshin he had formed used successive futon ninjutsu to stun it and force it back down the hall. The beast then swung a tentacle, which Sasuke roasted with a kaiden. "Gokakyu no Jutsu. Fire release. Great fireball technique. Are you skilled enough in Sweden ninjutsu to shape the water in your own body?" Shikamaru asked, turning to face the red-headed girl. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I can only work with water that already exists." When she said, "I'm a fuinjutsu specialist," Sakura noticed one of Naruto's clones give the girl an inquisitive glance. With a sigh, the Nara said, "Make every effort to move it farther down the tunnel. Look for its legs." However, she had already started to run while navigating through hand seals. With a shout of, "Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shuriken Shadow Clone Technique," Naruto threw a huge collection of kunai, possibly all he had left, at the creature. The creature stumbled backwards on its short legs, screaming in pain and rage as the dozen kunai multiplied, with dozens upon dozens more following them and bombarding it. Explosions engulfed the creature, with successive bangs reverberating throughout the corridor. Sakura realized he had used a lot more chakra to duplicate exploding tags. It stumbled and fell backwards, rolling towards the end of the corridor, and they ran after it. The blonde panted, winded, then formed two of his Kongo Fusa and launched them towards the creature's legs. The creature dodged backwards, and was caught off guard by a fuinjutsu trap. The red-haired girl laid with her tendrils that exploded in a brilliant flash of light beneath its feet. She realized that they were almost there. "Sasuke! The Doden technique," cried the Nara. A shout of, "Doden! Dosakiryu, earth release, mudslide technique," echoed throughout the cavern as Sasuke slammed his hands into the ground. She didn't have a dojutsu like the Byakugan or Sharingan, and Sakura wasn't a censor, but she could see the strain in the Uchiha's features, knew him well enough to recognize the lines of fatigue that creased his brow, and she doubted that he had the chakra to bring down the beast himself. She also knew that Naruto hadn't seen any Doden techniques with his Sharingan. A dual shout from Naruto and Shino, along with their combined futon Daitopa, knocked the creature into the caldera. She summoned all the chakra she could muster, which wasn't much, and echoed Sasuke's shout, her own Doden Dosakiryu combining with the Uchiha's to sweep the creature off its feet and towards the canyon top. Sakura sagged forward in unconsciousness for the second time that evening, but this time she was grinning. On the sidelines, Naruto watched Shino grab Sakura as she fell and watched Sasuke stumble back, taken by surprise by his own unexpected exhaustion. The blonde was having a hard time standing, even his vast reserves depleted after flinging so many ninjutsu, and he exhaled in relief as the monster that had pursued them plunged into the lava. Then, with lava melting through its flesh as it screamed in agony, the creature leapt out of the caldera and toward the sky, but before it could get away, Fuinjutsu tightened over the pit, pulled taut and alight with countless kanji, and the creature collided with it, bounced backwards, and fell back down towards the lava and its inevitable doom. The girl was tall for her age, maybe 5'8". Impressive considering she only looked a year or two older than the genin. She wore a purple, sleeveless kimono blouse with yellow trimmings held close by a traditional obi with a long, streaming bow tied to it, mesh armor underneath it, and a short white skirt. Naruto turned to look at her, finally free to evaluate her, and was only slightly surprised by the long, Uzumaki-red hair that flowed down her back in an elaborately braided ponytail, bound out of her black eyes by a white headband. Oddly, she was also barefoot. She was also looking at him. "Uzumaki Hinoka," the girl said, bowing. Choking, Naruto said, "Uzumaki?" He exclaimed, his voice a haunting echo of Naruto before memory. Naruto had suspected and thought, but the abrupt admission had completely taken him by surprise. The other genin had some responses, but those were overshadowed by a horrible realization. The young woman nodded, raising an eyebrow in inquiry. "Yes," she said. "And you?" "Kazuhiko. That traitor had a daughter in Kiri. It had to be. There was no other way." In those few brief moments, nothing of the original Naruto was left. A deep sense of resentment and overwhelming sympathy rose in Naruto, who was completely a remnant of Kushina. The memory retorted, "Uzumaki Naruto," and Hinoka actually retreated a step, startled, though it was unclear if that was because of the name or the sudden, malevolent look she was receiving. The female Uzumaki glanced at his headband, licked her lips, let out a trembling breath, and said, "I assume you're Konoha no Kusari. Takeyatsu's son? Other than myself and my father, she is the only other Uzumaki I've ever heard of. Additionally, a Kongo Fusa wielder." Even as the blonde nodded, the genin gasped, shock roiling through them in a wave, and a piece of Naruto's story fell into place with a dull thunk, and a misplaced phrase in the wrong company. The air was thick and tense enough to slice with a blunt kunai, and it seemed wrong to do anything but watch. He said, "Your father is dead," in a chilly voice. "My mother killed him." Hinoka nodded, and the gasps that followed were insignificant in comparison. "Are you also loyal to Kirigakure? With Kumogakure's help, Kiri destroyed our clan. Everyone was killed." His voice was filled with intense disgust. "I am regarded by Kiri as a rebel," the redhead acknowledged. "Are you familiar with the bloodline purges?" She went on. "I belong to the bloodline faction," after receiving the blonde's tentative nod. "Our goal is to transform Kirigakure from its violent past into a place where incidents like Uzushio's fall would never occur again." Hissing out a frustrated breath and raking his hand through his hair, Naruto asked another question because he was unable to express his feelings about that without succumbing to the vile, dark hatred he was attempting to repress. How did Kazuhiko make it through Uzu's collapse?" "It has taken a long time to piece the story together," the girl sighed. "My mother and I found it after years of searching through secrets Kiri wanted to keep hidden in secrets we shouldn't have access to," Hinoka whispered. "The truth," she explained, "my father was young, by Uzumaki standards, with another rough, ragged breath. He was born to a pregnant Uzumaki woman the day after the battle. During the battle, she was kidnapped by Kirigakure Anbu. Kiri had everything it desired by the time she passed away during childbirth." Naruto asked softly and pleadingly, "What was her name?" as words stuck in his throat and the weight of his horrifying realization clouded his vision. If not unexpected, the silent response from Uzumaki Aiko was damning, haunting, and destructive. The memory resurfaced, just as it had been suppressed, and he suddenly started crying, and the room echoed with a strangled gasp. "Uzumaki Aiko was my great-aunt." His horror was reflected on the faces of those around them, and he was certain that his Uba, great-aunt, and her Obaa, grandmother, were the same. The Uzumaki were a great clan in terms of skill and numbers, but by the time Uzushio fell, Aiko was 2 weeks past due, and it was statistically impossible that another woman in the clan named Aiko was scheduled to give birth at that particular moment. Kin, she called him in her mind, broken. A child. Should have been stronger. Should have saved. And with the added revelation that he was the cousin she had hoped to meet but never had, this was devastating. The sanity of the Kushina. Echoes. Tethered throughout the memories, shattered, and the only things holding the Jinchuriki together were the optimism of the Naruto. Echoes and the cold determination of the Mito. Echoes. The memory was not faring well at this revelation. "She killed him, her own cousin," Hinoka said, shaking her head in shock, but her words were not recrimination but rather grief, anguish, and pain for two souls who had not survived to meet her. "You are Ero. Kyofu's perverted godfather's granddaughter," Naruto said abruptly, his eyes wide. She gazed at him in disbelief. "Who?" Sasuke gave a strained snort to the side, saying, "That's his nickname for Jiraiya. Sama." "Jiraiya. Sama?" The majority of the other genin around her reacted similarly to Hinoka's choking. Naruto gave a nod. Yeah, he and Aiko. Oba were expecting their first child when Uzushio fell. Evidently, she had never before considered the possibility of being descended from one of the Densetsu no Sanin, legendary 3 ninja. Good, Naruto thought. Possibly in retaliation, I don't want to be the only one who is totally caught off guard here. What brought you to this place? The question was posed by Shino in his typical monotone. There was a crash. My boat was caught in a whirlpool, sighed Hinoka. Sukuda.san came across me after passing the wreckage. He saved my life. Her eyes briefly glowed with regret before hardening. But the experiments they are doing here, the Mizukage ordered them to create new, summoning creatures that are more powerful. I was aware that I needed to stop them. Hinata's ears pricked up. See. Create. How were some Mons created? The redhead shrugged and said, mostly breeding, splicing of genes. The memories were screaming at Naruto, but he pushed them back with not by his will when he saw they were jumbled and unintelligible. His cousin also appeared to be trying to tell him something, or perhaps ask him something, by giving him a subtle glance. My task was primarily to restrict the creatures with my fuinjutsu, and prepare contracts for them. Abducting actual summons where they could. There's a species native to the island, which helped. So, what? Sasuke said. You simply intended to drag them along until they received the potent summons they desired. You couldn't have called for assistance, really. With the exception of the dubious company, you're kind of alone here. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder and turned back toward the caldera. The teenager's cheeks flushed a little. You know, I would have thought of something. She clapped her hands over her mouth in shock after snapping. Definitely Naruto's cousin. Shikamaru snorted, but the comment was kind, if patient. Hinoka smiled back at the blonde as he smiled at her. For a moment, there was a cackling, wheezing laugh, and then the elder calmed down, while his brother looked at him with concern, his bright eyes absorbing the changes. Ni-san, is this suffering worth it? You give more of yourself to the madness with each action you take, he said slowly. The same insanity that asserted. I understand. The elder interrupted harshly, before sighing, I know. What prevented me from doing this? I would have spared you this pain and brought about a tangible, quick change, the younger asked in a mournful, powerful voice. The elder shook his head and said, Oto, you've already forgotten. I specifically requested your help with this, but you turned me down. You argued that it was too much of a risk. I was therefore compelled to act independently. When unique eyes met, the younger one sighed and said, I'm sorry, but the elder snorted. My Otuto is you. It is my responsibility to keep you safe, regardless of how stupid you may be, the man said, but with each action he took, that darkness got closer to enslaving him and destroying his identity. Why hold off? Suddenly, the younger one said, why not right now? The board is not yet set, and the stars are not yet aligned, the elder said, shaking his head. Not every player has taken their places. In fact, some have not yet arrived, while others will soon discover their departures. This will eventually happen, and the secrets will be exposed. Isn't it true that the world will change from now on? Yes, the elder said. Yes, it exists. The rest of the Konoha.nin and the film crew were celebrating their departure from the island, but the two cousins had wanted a private conversation, so they stood on the bow of a repurposed Kirigakure ship. Their original vessel had been scuppered, unsalvageable, but the sailors had suggested that they take Sukuda's boat and use it themselves. They were heading to Nami no Kuni, Land of Waves, to restock before continuing on to the Kanata docks of Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire. Hinoka would depart the group before they returned to their homeland, though, and instead charter a boat to Mizu no Kuni. But for the time being, they were navigating the whirlpools that surrounded the island, the sailors cautiously following a map that Hinoka had stolen from Sukuda's rooms. The sea in front of them rife with whirlpools, the eddies strewn all over the ocean, and once more the memories screamed at Naruto, presenting him with vision after vision that he couldn't quite make sense of. Hinoka's voice jerked Naruto out of his reverie, saying, You don't recognize this island? The redhead stared at him and asked in a low voice. I don't, should I? With a sorrowful sigh, she said, This is what remains of Uzu no Kuni, Land of Whirlpools. A beat. Then, no, said Naruto, shaking his head, that isn't feasible, this is. The redhead insisted, this is Bokyaku no Shima, the Forgotten Island, which is all that's left of Uzushiogakure. The island's face was cleansed by the Uzumaki clan's forgotten Fuinjutsu. A causality, a technicality in the circumstances of Uzu's founding, he and Naruto had both known that. The village had been established by 6 clans, 6 families banding together to establish a home for themselves, and this fact was etched in blood into the very fabric of Uzushio-gakure. Due to the treachery of the Hazuka, the village's foundational stones, and consequently the Roku no Hagakoku, protectorate of 6, had turned to dust and ash, and the village itself had disintegrated around the fighters, its secrets dispersed to the winds as the treacherous Hazuka broke a solemn pact. 2. However, he was unaware that this was the island. The full restoration meant that there were very few traces of the previous habitation, and they could not have been less noticeable in the dark, from an unidentified vantage point. The boat's spinning was one of the whirlpools, and, oh god, that's what that valley was, he realized, feeling sick. Stories from the Kohaku survivors to Mito filled his mind. The remains of the final battle turned into a mass burial ground. Bile got up and he gagged, spewing the remnants of his lunch over the ship's wooden bow. Hinoka patted his back awkwardly, a pained, distant expression on her face as she looked back at the island. When Naruto realized that the map leading the sailors through the eddies was probably one of the same maps the Hazuka had made for the invasion of Uzushio, his lip curled slightly. The whirlpools of Uzu were not wholly natural. The seafloor was crawling with Fuinjutsu protections, just like the island they protected, constantly shifting the vortexes as they formed and creating new ones. Only 3 specific, windy shipping lanes were completely safe to negotiate, and there was no hope for navigating the whirling tides without a map or a sailor who knew the eddies well. The location where the laboratories were kept was where we were. When he could, the blonde stated, that was the administrative district, and his fellow Uzumaki nodded in agreement. Yes, to the best of my ability to verify. The village's administration area, which was situated close to the caldera of the dormant volcano, was run using various Fuinjutsu techniques. Further down one side of the volcano, there were also a few abandoned buildings that had grown overgrown in the decades since. Since not all of those buildings were destroyed by the Fuinjutsu, unlike the shinobi clan compounds, the scientists thought those were the remains of the civilian accommodations. The valley? With the famous picture of Uzushio in his mind, Naruto questioned, picturing a curved valley, a range of smaller mountains on the other side, and trees on either side of a large river that ran through the valley to the coast, with the homes of thousands of people, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, civilians and shinobi alike, on its banks. Uzu had been destroyed because it was a threat, and part of being a threat was having a civilian population of over 15,000 and a shinobi force that was nearly 6,000 strong and steadily expanding. The Roku no Hagakoku themselves made up about 2/3 of the shinobi ranks, and nearly a sixth of the civilian population. It was widely regarded as the most violent incident in shinobi history. 3. Yes, she said, nodding once more. Nothing of value is left. It seems that all of the scrolls that were not taken by the Fuinjutsu collapse were claimed by escaping clans. Naruto was aware that the Kohaku clan had taken some of it, and that foreign search parties had taken even more. The other clans of the 6 had claimed what was left of their own techniques after the fall, but the mysterious Fuinjutsu defenses of Uzushio-gakure had claimed the majority of the village secrets, much to Mito's dismay. These defenses had been activated the moment the Roku no Hagakoku was broken, when the attack started, and it was only by chance that one of the Kohaku had been able to recover the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, a ceremonial clan sword, from the body of Uzumaki Tsutomu. Kushina had proudly worn that blade into battle throughout her entire career as a shinobi. He shook his head regretfully and said, "How did we? We were returning from a mission in Yuki no Kuni. Arriving back at Kanata docks. We ought to have stayed far away from Uzu no Kuni. How the hell did we get here?" he asked, frantically running a hand through his hair. "I had a similar problem with my own vessel," said Hinoka, shrugging. "Was it fate? Maybe?" In jest, she offered. A moment later, he stopped when he noticed the strange expression his cousin was giving him. "Sorry," Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. His laughter was a disorganized sound with a hint of mania. With a giggle, the redhead covered her mouth with her hand and said, "It's fine." According to Naruto, so, that talent of yours, with the odd Fuinjutsu pattern. "I've always been a natural at Fuinjutsu," she shrugged. "I mostly concentrated on the talent because I found it fascinating that there could be such power in the world. The ability to bind someone's will, suppress consciousness, or seal a biju with a few brush strokes. Even though it comes naturally to others in other ways, the power for which my ancestors were exterminated has always come to me in the form of those tendrils. From what I understand, that's not a common manifestation of Fuinjutsu. Simply put, there were 2 Uzumaki who were skilled in that manner during Mito Obei's lifetime. The last one I've ever heard of would have to be my great-grandmother's brother, your great-grandfather, Uzumaki Tsutomu." The blonde nodded thoughtfully. My great-grandfather was the head of the Uzumaki clan? The redhead asked, blinking. She gave a disbelieving shake of her head. Astonishing, huh? Chuckled Naruto. What if I told you that the heir apparent to the daimyo's throne of Uzu no Kuni was your Obaa Chan's first daughter, his older sister? Or that Senju Hashirama was the spouse of my Oba Chan, Tsutomu's sister? You're descended from the Shodai Hokage? Hinoka asked, turning to face him with wide eyes. Was that, in fact, what she learned from all of that? To put it lightly, the Jinchuriki said, shaking his head, it's complicated. After a brief silence, she raised an eyebrow in interest and said, I wonder if this talent of mine is a gene, then. Similar to your Kusari? Perhaps, hummed Naruto, it might even be a mutation. Like Shikatsumiku of the Kagaya clan, it's one of those ancient Kekkei Genkei that people don't know much about. The girl nodded, and after a brief period of silence, she said, I meant to ask you earlier. Her eyes became serious, and she said, I know your mother's moniker, but what was her name? Naruto grinned and said, Kushina Uzumaki. The girl committed the name to memory by nodding. So, we know who your father is, and my mother, he said. If it's okay with you, may I ask who your mother is? My parents' story isn't a happy one, Hinoka sighed. No love, no secret marriage, no hidden union between a blushing maiden and the valiantly unbroken shinobi. Due to a specific directive from the Sandaime Mizukage, I was born in Kirigakure. She then snorted, an unhappy sound that Naruto believed was out of character for the upbeat teenager. My father was the Sandaime's right hand, and he was ordered to bed a clan Kunoichi to continue the Uzumaki clan in Kirigakure. He chose to bed a woman born of not one clan, but two. She is the only parent I have ever had and gave birth to me. Before anyone even knew I was conceived, Uzumaki Kazuhiko was killed the following month, and I was hidden away from the brutality of the Sandaime before I was even born. Naruto nodded in agreement, and she paused for a moment before asking, and your father? I hope you don't mind, she said, but I might not give you her exact name. My mother was is closely linked to the Bloodline Rebellion. With any luck, one day I may introduce you to my mother openly, from a liberated Kiri. With a smile on his lips, Naruto rolled his eyes. She nodded when he asked, do you know the rumors? As Hinoka muttered, the Yondaime Hokage, that's quite a lineage you've got. He shot back, quite a lineage for both of us, to which she chuckled. When they got to Nami no Kuni, they paid a quick visit to Tazuna and his family's house, and the locals were delighted to see the Konoha.nin and their friends again. The director, who was more than happy to illustrate the tale of the tragic story of a ravaged island nation, was even tricked into making a movie by the bridge builder. Naruto and Hinoka's farewell was bittersweet. The older teen had flatly refused the blonde's offer to deliver a message to the Hokage on behalf of his cousin and the Bloodline rebels. She had insisted that this was Kiri's battle. We have to hold ourselves accountable. Naruto then wished his new cousin a safe journey, and the young lady went back to her native country. They left with the promise to stay in touch when the sun was shining brighter on their futures, rather than saying goodbye. The assurance that day would arrive was an unspoken agreement between them. When the three Genin teams and their sensei returned to Konoha, they joined the Sandaime and the two Sannin, who had accompanied the returning teams to the administrative building and were both very concerned about their godson's safety following the unanticipatedly long mission. In the mission debriefing, the lengthy and taxing process was full of challenging inquiries and in-depth analyses of their choices in the face of conflict. Surprisingly, Jiraiya chastised Kurenai for employing such a chakra-taxing technique. She had openly acknowledged that she and the three Genin would have perished if Asuma hadn't intervened at the last minute to save them. Tsunade also scolded the Uzumaki for hurrying into battle with the Kyukyoku no Kuchiyosaju. None of the Genin were likely to forget the sorrow in Sarutobi's eyes when Naruto brought up Hinoka and her tale. Later, Naruto had drew Jiraiya away and explained Uzumaki Hinoka's allegations about her father and paternal grandmother. He detested it, but it made sense. He detested the possibility that it was true. Kazuhiko, he thought, trying the idea out. Aiko had always referred to their son as her little prince, meaning prosperous prince. And if only his life had been more prosperous. Our son, he claimed, putting the phrase to the test. Since their child had always been theirs, he could not bring himself to refer to the boy as his son. Aiko's and Jiraiya's. Even if he felt pain when he thought about Aiko, the only woman he had ever loved and could have loved besides Tsunade. He whispered, dead, to test the truth. For the first time since Minato and Kushina's deaths, Jiraiya sobbed while holding his head in his hands. Heart-heavy, she stalked the facility's ruined halls. She fought back tears as she thought, even more destroyed than last I saw it. A great massacre was held here. I wonder if they're still alive. However, she couldn't be certain and wouldn't be until she messaged her loved ones. She and her new cousin had eliminated a formidable threat, but Shigiri no Sato, the village of the Bloody Mist's repressive government persisted, and she would see it through to its demise. Even if it meant standing up to Yagura alone. But for the time being, she would send out her summons. Because Uzu no Kuni was surrounded by ancient barriers, she had been unable to summon anything on the island. Tsukuda.san acknowledged that they had selected the island because of its remote location and the characteristics of the wards that surrounded it. There was not a single cave on the island where anything could be called forth, and summons was not allowed to enter the island. Except for the native inhabitants of Ryuchido, Dragonground Cave, the ancient Uzumaki no Kekai Ninjutsu, barrier techniques of the Uzumaki, prohibits entry or exit for any summoned creatures. Since one of the other scientists had already taken one of the younger snakes for their research, Hinoka had not dared to challenge the snake clan of summons with her presence, which infuriated the legendary creatures. She had therefore been unable to use her summoning abilities while on Bokyaku no Shima. With her hand slammed to the ground, she exclaimed, Kachiyose no Jutsu, summoning technique. She smiled at the lit small Takashigani spider crab instead of flinching or shielding her eyes as a puff of smoke burst around her. The tall, footed crab appeared. Hinoka-chan. It exclaimed with delight. She said, "Hello, Haru.kun. Would you kindly take this note to Okawa-chan for me?" "Oh yes," shouted Haru. She attached the note to the leg of the messenger crab, and it instantly spread out in a cloud of smoke. The note had read, "Mother, I won't take the chance of saying too much in this note, and I only hope it reaches you quickly. Even though I'm alive, I haven't been able to use our shared summons yet. When I can, I'll elaborate. I'm currently at the remains of the Kagaya clan compound on the northeast island. I will start my journey to the Katamaru clan hideout and then the main island in 2 days. Your daughter, love, Terumi Hinoka." Uzumaki Sarutobi gave the girl in front of him a wary look. "So, why did you ask to see me alone, Ino.kun?" he inquired. A hostile daimyo, Konoha's enemy, had the Yamanka in his head, and he had a suspicion that whatever she was going to reveal would not be good. Hiruzen sighed and waved a hand to scatter his 4 Anbu guards as the Kunoichi surveyed the room suspiciously. Believing their leader could manage a basic genin, all 4 disappeared at once. With a harsh swallow, Ino dropped into a bow, while in the mind of Kazuhana Dodo, Hokage. "Sama, I have discovered 2 facts of critical importance to Konohagakure." With a raised eyebrow, Hiruzen signaled the blonde to go on. "The first I discovered was that Dodo had assistance in staging his coup. A man by the name of Nanzo helped him to form and execute the plan. The agreement was that some of the advanced technology of Yuki no Kuni would be shared with Nanzo, a bargain that Dodo didn't honor." Sarutobi was hardly brave enough to breathe. "Nanzo? Perhaps it was just a coincidence, but in the world of shinobi." Ino gave a nod. "Yes, Hokage. Sama. However, I can recognize him as a man that my father warned me about. Shimura Danzo of Anburut." The confirmation was a sharp pain in his chest, like salt to a wound that had never healed, but he had known and suspected the moment she spoke. "There's more, Hokage. Sama." Ino's voice had been tremulous before, but now it was blatantly uncertain. "Dodo initially intended to honor his deal with Danzo," she stated. "He feared the reprisal if he had failed to come good on his side of the bargain. But a man approached him, revealed the truth of Danzo's duplicity, and insisted in no uncertain terms that Dodo make no attempt to fulfill the arrangement, or to aid Konoha in any way." The Hokage suppressed his feelings and gave the Yamanaka careful thought. "What have you been able to ascertain about this man?" asked the man. Ino gave a shrug. "Dodo seems to have forgotten the whole thing, which is odd. There's just 3 things. A vague impression of spiky gray hair, a disturbingly vehement hatred of Konoha, and a name. Shishiki, knowledge." Asuma had suggested a huge spar. Asuma had urged that it would be enjoyable. How foolish they were. Shouts erupted throughout the training area, causing genin to run and engage in combat, culminating in a single, spectacular battle in front of them. A free dot for dot, all involving 9 children. And they were meant to be keeping an eye on this chaos in some way. Kakashi let out a sigh. Dodge, dive, and duck. Kick and flip. The mutt let out a cry of pain, which she thoroughly enjoyed. Then there was a shout as someone carried her down, shielding her body with theirs while a particularly nasty Kaiden jutsu sailed over their heads, with an arm over her shoulder. As she stood back up, she looked at her fellow genin, rolling her eyes at a familiar mop of bright blonde hair. With a jutsu on his lips, Naruto, who was already on his feet, glanced back at her and gave her a fleeting smile before charging back into the battle. Unwillingly, Ino found herself transported back in time to the moment she had decided to put aside any resentment she had for the blonde. Flashback. Immediately following Sarutobi's address to the rookies. Ino was powerless to stop it, she was enraged. Ino had been trained in the arts of the mind as a member of the Yamanaka Ichizoku. Regarding her family's methods as well as some general psychology knowledge, it was essential to the application of Yamanaka techniques, which, if done poorly, frequently resulted in severe mental trauma for both the user and the target. One day, when they were practicing as kids, Ino's own mother unintentionally destroyed her sister's mind, and she lived with the guilt ever since. Naruto had never particularly appealed to her. She had distanced herself from him because her parents had insisted that she have nothing to do with him. She had assumed over the years that her father, the sub-commander of the T&I department, had somehow learned that her fellow blonde was a complete nutcase and had advised her to stay away from him as a result. Thus, she had chosen to ignore the way he was treated. More accurately, she had convinced herself that it was justified and that it wasn't as horrible as it was. She desired to be ill. You were unable to do those things to people. The psychological harm would be disastrous. Even Ino, who knew very little about the subject, was aware that you could end up creating a repressed personality, which was extremely dangerous and could be disastrous in the hands of a Jinchuriki. By treating someone in that manner, particularly if they were the kind to suppress unpleasant feelings and memories. And it was clear from Naruto's constant smiles, jokes, and prodding that that was the case. She felt like screaming. A long, forgotten memory suddenly came back to her. With silent, motionless tears streaming down his face, Naruto sat on the swings close to the academy. She couldn't recall the names of the two civilian children who approached him and made fun of him. He sat there, unconcerned, as though this was normal. In retrospect, she thought it most likely was. Then the blows came. He was dazed and fell off the swing after one struck the left side of his face. The two boys started beating and kicking Naruto, seemingly excited by their wounded victim. The other students merely let out cries of alarm. Some of the girls even burst out laughing. Abruptly, an older man who had retired at the end of that year, Nadaruka, appeared as an instructor and pulled the two boys away from Naruto. However, he abandoned Naruto while whispering something about antagonize and the demon to the other two kids and pulling them away by their ears. Sakura, a girl with pink hair, bent down to try to help the bleeding boy. She eventually called one of the other teachers, who reluctantly carried the boy away while Sakura worriedly followed. Despite her temptation, Ino had ultimately chosen not to accompany her. Now she recalled that day. Sakura had met Naruto on that day. The following day, Ino had gone up to Sakura, and she had warned her off. The idea made her stomach turn a little. Sakura was informed by her father that Naruto was a bad guy. Sakura had also trusted her. That day was the start of their friendship. Since then, Sakura had not liked Naruto. She went into her room, closed the door, and collapsed to the floor after entering her house without even greeting her parents, who shrugged and carried on with their daily routines. Ino was at a loss for what to think. She had grown up thinking that the dominant superpower was Konoha. That it was the pinnacle of good and could do no wrong. The village as a whole lived by the principles of sportsmanship, teamwork, and camaraderie that were instilled in them as academy students. Made them superior to the rest of the world in some way. Her mother had told her those stories of heroes and heroines who fought under the Leaf's banner and saved the day. Since she was the heiress of Yamanaka and the newest member of a strong family that dated back thousands of years, she was obviously aware that shinobi life was not really like that. Because she had concealed herself behind her illusions, she was a self-made idiot. In many respects, it enabled them to protect her from the harsh realities of shinobi life. She was disgusted that she lived in a place that could be so indifferent to a child, and the illusion had now been shattered. That is capable of such heinous acts. She was genuinely unsure of what to think. The circumstances facing her fellow rookies were strikingly similar throughout the village. Flashback. Final. After shaking her head, the young Kunoichi returned to the battle, quickly avoiding a thrown kunai and retrieving one of her own from her pocket to hold in her hand. With the late April sun shining brightly overhead, Shika had no opportunity to use his Kagemane, shadow imitation, in this clearing, so she used it to deflect a blow from him. Shikamaru took the brunt of the taijutsu tornado that whirled past Kiba and Akamaru, forcing Ino to spin away. As she watched Kurenai remove the Nara from the battlefield and tend to his injuries, she grimaced sympathetically at the sound of the genin's body hitting the ground. Already moving against another opponent, Kiba attempted to skewer Hinata, who was evading with ease. When Sakura threw an earthen spear at her head, Ino ducked and clasped her hands together, creating a distraction. Sweden. Mazurapa, water release. Wild water wave, she intoned while forming hand seals. Adoden. Doryuheki, earth release. Earth-style wall, appeared from the ground to shield Sakura from the water jet that sprang from between Ino's lips. Ino threw a bunch of kunai with explosive tags fastened to the rock wall, but she was unable to launch a counterattack since she had to avoid a kick from Sasuke. When her crush attacked her just a few months ago, Ino might have froze, but now she just smiled and did a handstand, turning her feet to trip the Uchiha. Before Ino could take advantage of his backward flip, Naruto's Kusari was wrapped around his torso. He was momentarily stunned by the force of the movement as the raven was raised into the air and then brought back to the ground while she watched. "Okay, that's enough," called Kakashi, who appeared before them with a slightly frazzled appearance. "I think you're all on top of your jutsu." The other genin and Ino chuckled. In the middle of Yakiniku-Q later that day, Choji sighed as his mother fussed over him, holding his face in her hands as she had been doing lately. To be honest, living with only one eye wasn't as difficult as he had anticipated. He could manage that, even though it meant he had to consider his new blind spot and pay more attention to his other senses. It was challenging and complex, but Choji could encounter difficulties outside of eating competitions. To be honest, the most disenchanting response was from his mother. For a whole week, his younger sister had clung to his side, seemingly afraid to let him go, but it was cute instead of annoying. Since transplants are rare in the shinobi world, his father had just sat him down and talked about his options. "Hitaki Kakashi is not for everyone," his 2.san had stated. "It's likely that you will be blind on that side for the remainder of your life." Therefore, he had proposed that the younger Akamichi retire as a genin and continue to serve the clan in other capacities. In a low voice, the man had said, "Your sister could do it." Even more difficult for him to comprehend than the idea of one day assuming their father's role himself was the idea of his adorable 6-year-old sister becoming the Akamichi Jirakudem Toshu, 16th head of the Akamichi. Choji had flatly refused, and Choza's smile had never been so proud as it was on the day his son graduated from the academy. When he saw her, his mother began to complain that he couldn't even tell she was speaking to him because he was blind, not stupid, damn it. She sat on the other side of the room, her long, straight, pale, blonde hair slightly tinted green. Her bright mint green eyes were completely hidden by her Coke bottle-bottom glasses, but even as he watched, they slid down and briefly showed them before she pushed them back up her nose. Wearing a red dress and a white lab coat, the girl was likely no more than a year older than him. She was stunning. After a long moment of staring at the girl, Choji's father cleared his throat. He turned to face the man, blushing at the knowing expression in the Akamichi clan head's eyes. His sister and mother continued to talk without any awareness. Still, that girl. He would most certainly return to eat here. A darkened cave brought two shadowed figures together. "Ah, cousin," said the first with a sly smile. His voice was thick, with sugary syllables and honey that was too sweet. "You have some information for me?" "Indeed." The second spoke in a different way despite their relationship. Delicate sighs and intonations punctuated his breathy voice. "The price will be triple our standard." Despite snorting, the first gave the required amount, at least because he trusted Shishiki. Their information was reliable and significant. "But I trust this will be worth my time and money." "Of course, cousin. This could very well ruin your current plans." "Oh, Uzumaki Naruto has awoken the Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains." The first one choked. Truly?" The second responded, "Yes. And we have verified this claim," expecting the next question. The second said with a smirk, "Not only this, but we have reason to believe the seal is weakening. I trust you will adjust your plans accordingly." The first one laughed. "Indeed, cousin, indeed." The three genin teams were sent on another mission, this time a straightforward patrol around Hai no Kuni's, Land of Fire, boundaries. Since most shinobi would not cross international borders unless on a mission, and those who were escorted out of the country, there was little chance of actual combat on such a mission. Each three-person team had one chunin who served as both a leader and a backup, with Iruka leading their squad, Naruto, Sasuke, and Shikamaru were dispatched to patrol in the west. For a brief period, the Chunin Sensei was not at the academy, performing administrative duties for the Hokage or basic border patrol missions. To be honest, it was just bad luck. The four-person team was patrolling the area close to the boundaries of Ta no Kuni, land of rice fields, when a group of Ronin, wandering ninja, happened to be passing through. Iruka yelled at the enemy. Nin, "Hey! Stop!" as she pursued them. After exchanging a quick look, the three Ronin accelerated and ran through the treetops. Shikamaru nearly sighed as Sasuke snarled and threw a kunai toward the shinobis. That's just going to annoy them, he thought, accelerating his pace to match his leader and fellow squad members. When we catch up to them, I'll take the leader, Iruka replied. The three genin nodded to their former teacher, who gave them a slight smile. Naruto, Sasuke, you each take one of the other two each while Shikamaru runs interference and support. Naruto, send some of your clones to get backup. Naruto declared, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, shadow clone technique, as 9 clones appeared next to them. With concerned eyes, the original turned to face them and remarked, they've each got high Chunin level reserves. There was something wild and primordial about the Uzumaki that he briefly slipped into. Though he quickly dismissed the possibility as dangerous, he occasionally wondered if it was the Kyuubi. He didn't have to begin openly questioning his allies. Whatever it was, the genin's eyes were ablaze at that precise moment. The blonde gave a startled nod, and the Bunshin split up into 3-person packs and started running in different directions. One team headed for Konoha, while the others followed the rough paths of the other patrol squads. Shikamaru gave Naruto's words considerable thought. Level of Chunin. Meaning was taught, indicating danger. To reiterate, I'll take the leader, Iruka said. Pick up the stragglers. Sasuke turned to face one of the 3 genin as they nodded, and Naruto accepted the other. Shikamaru had already fallen to the ground and started to use his shadow imitation technique, or Kageme no Jutsu, to manipulate chakra. When the enemy started to form hand seals, Sasuke had already activated his Sharingan and used a weaker version of his own to counter the man's futon. Shinkagyoku, wind release. Vacuum sphere. But the Ronin were momentarily startled, and Shikamaru used a shadow tendril to trap his opponent. The man snarled at the 2 genin and barely avoided them. As the Ronin continued to both regularly clash with Sasuke and avoid any shadow tendrils Shikamaru threw at him, the Nara would continue to reevaluate his conclusions regarding the man's taijutsu skills over the next few minutes. The man was probably the team's sensor and was a close-range sensor based on the way he avoided the attacks long before they occurred. Although Shikamaru tried his best to help Naruto during the Uzumaki's own battle, he discovered that Naruto was managing his opponent effectively enough on his own. Sasuke's opponent, meanwhile, was just dangerous enough that Shikamaru dared not abandon the Uchiha. As Shikamaru hurled an elemental ninjutsu at the man, grunting with effort, said genin once more collided with the Ronin in a shadow of sparks. Sasuke followed the man as he span out of the way. However, the Raven was overconfident and was duped by their opponent into falling into the Kaiden Jutsu's path. Shikamaru's shadow grabbed hold of his teammate just as he was about to be roasted by friendly fire, forcing him to dodge with the body flicker technique, also known as Shunshin no Jutsu. The Uchiha acknowledged him with a nod, but that was all they could do before the man launched another attack. The Nara saw, out of the corner of his eye, as the lead Ronin twisted as he screamed in agony and drove a kunai into Iruka's stomach. Leaping to his sensei's aid, Naruto ran while making hateful hand seals. When Shikamaru saw Sasuke turn to fight their former foe, he was compelled to focus on Naruto's initial adversary. With a jutsu hand seal, the genin launched his Kaiden Gokakyu no Jutsu, fire release. Great fireball technique, in the direction of his adversary. Suijin Heki, water release. Water formation wall, was the snarled response from the enemy. As the fire struck the defensive jutsu, it turned to steam, but Shikamaru already knew that he had not invested enough chakra in the technique to penetrate the wall. A sickening crack that reverberated through the trees as Amino Iruka's body crumpled and his neck snapped diverted his attention. There was a distorted look of shock and horror on the Chunin's face. After a moment of rapt attention, Shikamaru had to dodge a kunai that flew out of the dispersing steam and reformed his Kageme hand seal. Even as his opponent ran at him, his sword drawn and drawn back to swing, Shikamaru took advantage of the bending and twisting shadows and the favorable afternoon conditions. The man abruptly stopped, trapped in the shadows of Shikamaru's move, and as Sasuke threw too many kunai with explosive tags attached, vaporizing his own opponent, an explosion shook the forest. The freshly created crater spewed smoke, which swirled among the nearby trees. The distraction caused Shikamaru's control to waver, and the Kagemane broke suddenly. With a Nodashi field sword in hand, the man immediately took the initiative and hurried to defeat the Nara. "When did I take that out?" he asked, stabbing forward with his kunai, even though he was shunning the man behind him. Before they could even realize it, the man was falling forward with a kunai sticking out of his back. Staring down at his blood-stained hands and then down at his assailant's body, the genius blinked in disbelief. As he fell, the man spun, and the impact with the ground sent the kunai right through his chest. That train driver's lifeless, icy eyes gazed back at him. Shikamaru quickly retreated from the body, flinching violently and nearly toppling over. He turned in time to witness Naruto and his lone surviving Kage Bunshin encircling the final shinobi with their Kongo Fusa, essentially binding him. The Uzumaki sighed as he turned to face the bodies, his eyes unreadable. "Come on. Shino, Sakura and Choji's team are this way. They're the nearest." "HN," was Sasuke's only answer as he approached and used the butt of a kunai to slap the shinobi hard over the back of his head. When he was done, he moved aside to let Naruto apply a fuinjutsu. Chakra Bando, sealing art. Chakra bind. To the man's forehead. He had started binding the man with rope. Shikamaru gazed with barely concealed disdain at the Uchiha. Does he not have any feelings about killing? Instead, he said, "Uruka. Sensei." Restricted emotion choked Naruto's voice. "He's already dead." Kamizuru Kurobachi, sometimes referred to as the Anbu operative Badger of Iwagakure, walked through Konoha's streets in silence. As instructed by Tsuchikage Sama, he was looking for a specific house, a specific target. With a deliberate motion that didn't even disturb the foliage, he rolled into a crouch among the bushes. The lights were on, and Kurobachi could see a lone figure moving inside even before his drone scouts came back. Even as the Kamizuru watched one of his bees administer the Haiden. Dokuken. Secret tradition. Poison sting. To the purple-haired Anbu, another, feminine figure was protecting the house from the shadows. As the woman's body fell to the grass below, he was already making his way inside, bringing his swarm closer to him. He was met at the door by the Konoha Genin, who threw a hail of kunai, which Kurobachi managed to avoid. He was followed by a spear-pointed chain that sliced Kurobachi cleanly through the chest. The man exploded into a massive hive that flew in the direction of their assailant as bees poured from the wound. Behind the blonde, a shadowed figure, the actual Kurobachi, dropped from the room's ceiling. The Genin killed or confused the swarm that was coming toward him by calling forth a futon. Daitopa, wind release. Great breakthrough, however, Kurobachi kicked the target's head while he was doing so. With a sickening crunch, the Genin's head struck a hard wall as it flew against it. Kurobachi moved closer to the fallen blonde, but he had to quickly duck because a kunai was flying at his head. Badger followed the movement and grabbed the blade, only to launch it back at its owner. The intruder collapsed backward, gasping around the kunai sticking out of his right lung and black hair clumping around his head. Kurobachi flew in the direction of his target, who was just waking up and could not defend himself when another Dokusen bee hit him squarely in the heart. The carotid artery allowed the thick, viscous venom to enter the bloodstream directly. The blonde's ragged breath was broken by the interloper's background whimpers. The target shivered and became motionless. Badger turned to the downed Raven child and congratulated himself on finishing the mission. But even as he turned, the target's lungs let out a raspy exhale. Kurobachi turned to see eyes screwed shut in agony, hands like claws, and long whisker marks. The poison's virulence could only be stopped by one thing. He grimaced when he thought about his middle brother. A Jinchuriki, not just an Uzumaki. Damn. The Genin would still be somewhat affected by the poison, but not sufficiently so to cause his death right away. After giving it some thought, Badger pulled a wakizashi, side, inserted sword, from its sheath on his back and charged at the blonde. He made an arc with his blade, but only a few meters from the target, he took a hard kick to the face. Senju Tsunade flipped backwards and landed next to the target, saving Kurobachi from certain death only by raising his hands to brace himself. Kurobachi grimaced as several of the bones in his hands broke, despite his evasion. The woman gave the assassin a fierce glare. She remarked, "I hear the buzzing, Kamizuru, then." Meaning Iwa. "Tell me, why is the Tsuchikage taking such an interest in my godson?" Kurobachi said nothing, and she growled, ready to charge again, but the Jinchuriki's coughing, blood streaming down his quickly pale face, diverted her attention. The Senju froze at what she saw as she turned to face the Uzumaki. She stood for a moment, shivering and gazing at the blonde's bloodied form, right before Kurobachi struck. Bees. With broken hands, his only tool is bees everywhere. As they flew in her direction, their poisoned barbs, which were still lethal despite not being tipped with the Dokusen's virulent poison, glinted. Tsunade was in motion before they could get to her, her hands covered in a green gleam of medical chakra. Color returned to his face even as they hit her and the blonde, and the Senju didn't even appear to notice, save for the odd wince. The woman was hit by sting after sting, and they might as well have not been there except for batting away the ones that were meant for her eyes. Of course, he realized with a growing sense of horror. The legendary Iryo.nin, Senju Tsunade. Kurobachi launched his last, strongest bee at the woman, who was already turning to run, saying, "She's developed a resistance to almost every poison in existence." After cleaning the boy's mouth of blood, the Sannin got up. 1. She grabbed the bee out of the air with 2 fingers, squashed it in a tiny burst of blood, and then ran at him with her fist cocked. Fuinjutsu paper? The Kamizuru attempted to dodge, but felt a hand press something light to his back, and all of a sudden he was immobilized. Tsunade's fist slammed into Kurobachi's face, destroying everything above his neck, and the last thing he knew was horror. There was silence after his paralyzed, headless body thudded to the ground. Naruto was finding Sasuke's mothering to be more oppressive than ever after the assassination attempt, which had occurred a week earlier. Sasuke had been hit in the lung by a kunai, even though he had been poisoned by what should have been a deadly sting. How has he recovered so fast? Gazing at the Uchiha, he thought. However, Tsunade's protective instincts far outweighed Sasuke's. Or, for that matter, Shizune's, which were aimed at them both. Naruto had proposed a visit to the training ground because he could tell the woman's well-intentioned fussing was making his cousin uneasy. Shizune and Tsunade had only permitted them to depart after obtaining an untrue pledge to handle it lightly. They talked about a variety of topics while they stretched and walked. Personal histories, new information about their ancestry, Naruto's paternal grandparents, Senju Satoru and Uchiha Kazu, were orphaned when they were young and were taken in by Sasuke's grandfather Kagami, and similar things. When Sasuke revealed that Shizune made him think of his late mother, Makoto, Naruto looked at his cousin sorrowfully and couldn't help but draw comparisons between the two women. Strike for strike, parry for parry, steel against steel. They ducked, dodged, and flowed while holding a sword in one hand and a kunai in the other. As they fell into Kata, the lessons of Kakashi echoed in their minds. Even Sasuke's Sharingan was having trouble predicting the next move made by the blonde, and Naruto's style was still all over the place, but he was working with it. Apart from their Kekkei Genkai, there were to be no chakras or jutsu used in this battle. Because of some lingering dislike for the ability from Mito's early years, Naruto hadn't been training in the Sharingan, indicating that it was a bad idea. As an alternative, he summoned lengths of Kusari, the extra weapons that were both distracting and helpful. Naruto found it more difficult to give them instructions beyond simply following him around as he used them more frequently. Sasuke had repeatedly attempted to fool him with a flickering genjutsu, suggesting fictitious movements to land a blow, but due to Kurenai's training and Mito's prior conflicts with Uchiha, they had never worked. Naruto's Kusari moved around him as he span, but they vanished a few seconds later. Sasuke turned to face him with Sharingan alight in his eyes as he halted the rotation. Naruto was abruptly transported back in time by that sight. A pitch black field, Tobirama beside her, with Raijin no Ken, sword of the Thunder God, in hand and already forming hand-in-hand seals. Her brother.in.law launched himself at Izuna Madara, fighting her in a taijutsu match. The playful nature of the exchange could only have been noticed by those who knew them well, which in this particular time and place only included Izuna and Tobirama, who were both completely engrossed in their own argument. She could almost imagine them dancing as they moved, trading gentle, forceful blows as though they were nothing. She recognized the smirk and the challenge it held as the man drew a sword. She flicked 2 kunai into her hand, their surfaces ablaze with lightning and crawling with fuinjutsu, their edges curving wickedly. Their blows collided in a battle of Kaden and Raiden chakra, which crackled beneath their feet like fall foliage. Pain. A blow to her abdomen as the world burst into excruciating pain. The fear and horror in Sharingan's eyes, he fell back, startled, and raised his hands to hold the sides of his head as Sasuke gazed at him, his eyes gleaming with fear. Because of his own abrupt distraction, Naruto didn't even see the kunai protruding from his stomach, rather, he felt it, as a malevolent parody of Mito's own wound. Naruto collapsed, tumbling backwards into the training field's hard surface. Even as he collapsed, the dense silence was abruptly broken by a cry of horror that echoed through the clearing. With a thud, Naruto fell onto his back, suffering, but as he looked sideways, he saw Hinata sprinting in his direction. It had been challenging to deal with Hinata over the past few months. Something within him, what he thought was the echo of Mito, harbored a deep seated contempt for the Hyuga clan. Some recollection from the past, some unspoken slight she couldn't forget. It was now affecting Naruto and his interactions as well, much like his mother's contempt for Kirigakure and Kumogakure. Unfortunately, knowing that the wound was so serious that he needed medical help right away, he channeled the Kyuubi's chakra. As the version. 1 chakra cloak burst forth, enveloping his body and curing his wounds, the blonde let out a sigh. I'll have to visit Koyanagi. Jichan. In any case, he would probably sustain a terrible scar. As he stumbled to his feet, the corrosive chakra liquid fire in his veins, he turned to look at the newest arrival. There was a vague look of fear in the Hyuga heiress's eyes as she stared at him. Even as he turned to assist a shell, shocked Sasuke in standing up, he asked, Hinata? And let the Kyuubi's power fade after his wound had healed. What are you doing here? As always, Hinata's voice was quiet and reserved, a shyness that was out of place with the icy Byakugan eyes that Naruto occasionally spied in the memories. I was just watching Sasuke-kun and Y. Yourself sparring, and Naruto. K.kun. Maybe Naruto would have said something nice on any other day or at any other time, recognizing and embracing. However, the repressed anger and hatred from the assassination attempt were still vivid in his mind. His mind was plagued by images of Iruka's mangled neck and bloodied chest. Battle instinct and rage from their own near-death experiences were pushing the young Uzumaki over the edge, and the echoes of Kushina and Mito were making him feel heavy. Together with the agony of his own wound, Mito's near-death experience with Madara, whom she had loved, was dragging him away and drowning him. It was made worse by the elder redhead's hatred of the Hyuga clan, and he was more enraged than he had imagined when he saw the girl's white eyes with their bulging veins. His anger was snapping its leash and rearing up, ready to strike, and everything was getting out of control. Naruto was filled with negative feelings that were more appropriate for his Uchiha ancestry. His target was Hinata. What were you doing? Why are you watching us? He had confided in Sasuke about private matters in this clearing, been enmeshed in very intimate memories and moments, and channeled the Kyuubi's chakra in a manner that this body was still unable to manage. The self-preservation of the Uzumaki screamed against, resisted, and denied that. I'm S.S.S.O.Re. Hinata stammered timidly as fear took hold of her. Even as Sasuke stepped aside and stared silently at his sudden rage, he hissed. Why were you watching us? Tell me. As she stammered over her words, she trembled in terror, the rejection a sharp sting. IW. Wanted T.Toa.ac. Noel. Edgy.u. Nerut.to.kun. F. Followed you a. Round because you inspire me. IW. Want T.tob.be your F. Friend. I don't give a fuck, he growled angrily. Half of his remarks were more Biju than Uzumaki now, and the other half were more something that was neither Kyuubi nor Naruto. I'm no circus freak for you to watch at your own convenience. I'm not a fucking dog for you to watch and play with when you fucking want to. How long have you been stalking me? He said. Something had to give because he had been a ticking emotional time bomb for days. With horror in her heart, the girl stammered. Naruto. K.kun. How long? She let out a startled, years, and then covered her mouth with her hands, astonished by her own terrified admission. She looked at the blonde, expecting a response, but he was slouched forward, trembling with an uncontrollable emotion. Despite his fringe casting shadows over his eyes, he gazed up at her with a ferocious hatred. He could see the utter horror and crushing fear in her own eyes, whatever it was she saw in them. He glared angrily at the Hyuga heiress, saying, I spent years of my life looking for friends. Looking for somebody to care about me. I had nobody except the Sandame, and sometimes Ruka, and sometimes the Ichirakus. His anger remained unabated despite the agony of contemplating Ruka. Really, what the fuck, Hinata? I just wanted to feel like one person my own age, actually liked me, but instead everyone threw insults at me, avoided me, and did what their parents wanted them to do. Now I find out that someone actually wanted to be friends with me and have something to do with me, but they were too afraid to talk to me. You wouldn't have been afraid of me if you truly valued me, thought I was inspirational, and wanted to be friends with me. You were, too. He railed against some imagined denial. But Hinata was too far gone to possibly muster up a defense. You were scared of me. You were afraid to come near me at all. So, Hinata, what did you truly desire? What? With tears running down her cheeks, Hinata turned and ran from the training area, too. As the girl fled, the blonde stood there, staring incredulously. His disbelief had little to do with what she had done. His incredulity was stronger and far more powerful, stemming from his own violent, abrupt reaction to the girl's presence. The sight of her eyes had burned a hatred in his heart. He had lost himself. He had lost all control over his identity. He didn't understand. That was exceedingly malicious. Sasuke's remark was factual and devoid of any emotion, sentiment, or purpose. Naruto sat down hard on the ground and rubbed his forehead with his hands as he suddenly became aware of everything in front of him and realized, after the fact, that his Sharingan had activated for the second time in his life. I know, he said. I'm not sure what happened to me. Sasuke said, I need to show you something, as he started to guide Naruto to the abandoned Uchiha compound while his distant cousin continued to stare at him intently. The Kyuubi's chain cage rocked with thunderous laughter deep within the Hake no Fuin Shiki, 8 trigrams ceiling style. And I need only fan the flames. Hatred. The weakness of mortals. A ruthless rictus of a grin spread across the furred face, creating a picture that could evoke gloom and despair. More laughter, dark and laced with ill will. Freedom was on the way. To my son, even my brother, with his foresight, could never match the full power of the Sharingan. This talent, the dojutsu that is ingrained in your blood, is a power that is descended from mine. Its power is great. No one can match the destruction you are capable of, save myself. You are a dangerous tool that can be used for both good and bad. You bear these eyes and their power, which includes the ability to command, imitate, and confuse. However, the secrets that the Sharingan conceals are far more powerful than its most basic form. I would not wish it upon you or your descendants, if they had even a fraction of your talent. I lament the passing of your soul into anguish, but you grow stronger, beyond the limits of mortal man. The potential for destruction in those eyes is unrivaled, but the price one must pay is that of emotional turmoil most extreme, unassailable regret, and guilt for the death of one loved one. Even as he was finishing, the text changed into something worse. It's true that the Mangekyo Sharingan skill is far more dangerous than the basic form. Great warrior avatars, dimensional transportation, powerful illusions, shifting blades, black flames, the darkest mental manipulations, and the clearest view into the secrets of the heart. Power grand enough to command even the Biju. I fear that one day you will bear Mother's eyes, which will turn the world into an idyllic world of illusion. It is your belief, my son, that these eyes are your greatest skill, the ultimate power. A claim your brother fiercely disputes, and anyone who uses this power has the world's destiny at their fingertips, and they must answer for it. I urge you, my son, to use this skill with caution, for all power has a cost, and the cost of this power is not only psychological. With each use your eyes become blurred, and your awareness and sight of this world diminishes, until I fear you will soon be unable to look upon even the faces of your daughters. However, is it not the burden of power to exercise it? Was this not demonstrated by the destruction your grandmother caused? Her crimes were undoubtedly horrible, but the mantle of the power she possessed, that I possess, that you possess, is indisputable. Because it is your legacy and your task to make the Uchiha great and to change the world, I implore you to use the power you possess to reorganize the very truth of reality. Eternal Mangekyo, he thought dimly, memories of Mito flickering in the back of his mind. If I don't gain those eyes, I will not be able to read the rest of this tablet. And if I'm not careful, I might go blind. And the rest were blurry, as if beyond his ability to see. His eyes had changed from blue to deep red as he had looked at this tablet in the Naka shrine that Sasuke had taken him to. Free Tomo had formed equally from the iris, but even then, his eyes had changed even more, taking the shape of 3 curved braces, the center of which was facing the center of his eye. Sharingan Mangekyo. A force that thrived on suffering and hatred. He could become the most powerful person in creation if he combines that with the Kyuubi. However, common sense retaliated, rallying against him with a blade of piercing realization and a shield of logic. Some ancient, power-hungry individuals set the Uchiha on a path to destroy the world. Their power, the Sharingan, the Mangekyo, the eternal Mangekyo, its abilities were both destructive and insidious. Izuna had been a god in Tsukuyomi's dream world, and the black flames of Amaterasu were Madara's toys. When their skills were combined, the power became so powerful that it could easily enslave even the strongest Biju. These eyes take your soul, Madara had once whispered, the eyes of torment, as Tobirama dubbed them. Such great gains awaited those who used the Sharingan, but such pains also. He had the power to destroy, but his mind was filled with warnings and memories of conversations between Mito and Madara. And the Kyuubi's anger was feeding them power. Emotion drew out his eyes and made the seal leak, and when combined, they had the power to wipe out everything. He could feel the hate, the malice, the unfathomable rage tearing down his barriers, his thoughts, his emotions, until only cruelty remained. The seal was breaking. It had to be. There was no other way to explain it. Uchiha was aware of unwavering hatred, that much was clear, but Kyuubi could feed on that hatred and spread it, as Mito had thought. There was no way that his sudden outburst of rage had made him a monster, and his Sharingan had fed on that and activated. However, it wasn't just the Biju, and it couldn't be held entirely responsible. He hated, and because he was part Uchiha, he hated, and the beast could only stoke his hatred rather than fully brainwash him into becoming a monstrous creature. He thought, I could have unleashed the Kyuubi today and I wouldn't have been able to stop it. My Uchiha genes could curse me. Not anymore. The world would no longer be in danger from this power. Not anymore. Naruto took his anger, aggression, and fury and sat on them, putting them in a corner of his mind that would never be seen again. And something else, something other than the Kyuubi, was born in his mind. The wrath of 1,000 storms, howling rage. In blind, maddening frustration, the Kyuubi threw itself against the cage's chains, its plans foiled once more, at least temporarily, before finally stopping and sitting to watch the creature form in a dark, bubbling pool in front of its cage. Repressing once more. I wonder. The Kyuubi, who is sometimes referred to as Kurama, watched the birth of something much darker than it could ever hope to be, felt the cracks in its cage, and laughed a low laugh as its chakra leaked into the host. Hope remained. Hinata took off running. With all of this terror and fear, she had very few people in her life to turn to, no one she could trust. Hinata took off running. As she ran, the dull thunk of her feet hitting the wooden floor reverberated through the hallways. Hinata ran immediately into her mother Hyuga Naomi's rooms. For years, the woman had been enchanted by a ravening madness. Naomi, the daughter of one of the side branches of the Hyuga, had been bred from an early age to be the heir apparent to the clan, and it was only this promise of a future place in the clan that had kept her from being branded by the clan's Juinjutsu, cursed seal, her younger brother, Hisoka, and their parents had perished in the Second War, defeated in battles and missions that were well beyond their capabilities. However, Naomi had been a strong woman, motivated by these setbacks to establish herself in the clan, and her skill had been so remarkable that she had been drafted at a very young age into the Shugonen Junishi, lit. 12 Gentleman Guardian Ninja. Until one day she received a call informing her that Heishi would marry her the following year. Clan tradition had dictated her response. Hyuga Naomi had abandoned everything, including her shinobi career, her guardian's friends, and even a rumored relationship with the son of the then daimyo, and had gone back to her birth village, where she married her destined husband and lived with him for 5 years before becoming pregnant with Hinata. 5 more years later, Hanabi was born. The next year was a tense one for the couple, and although she was confined by duty and motherhood, Naomi wanted more. Determined to regain her position among the Shugonen Junishi, Naomi spent months persuading Heishi to give Hanabi a wet nurse so she could resume her duties, and eventually Hinata's father had agreed. He should have refrained from doing so. 3. During the attempted rebellion, one of the other shinobis struck Naomi down the right side of her face, right through her active Byakugan. The rebels among the daimyo's guard worked quickly, persuading the woman to participate in their coup d'etat. The Hyuga woman had always been fiercely loyal to the daimyo and his family, and she had turned quickly. It was their intention to remove the current daimyo and install his younger brother, Naomi's rumored lover, on the throne. A variant of the Hyuga Soke no Juinjutsu, Hyuga main family's cursed seal technique, intended to permanently seal her chakra and confine the woman to the Hyuga clan compound, now rested on her Sama's forehead. Driven insane by the pain, only the Hokage's benevolence had spared the only surviving rebel from execution, and ever since, Naomi had remained in the Hyuga's care, a pale shadow of the person she had once been. However, Hinata frequently found herself in this situation. Occasionally, the madness would temporarily lift like clouds, revealing the woman's true nature, her compassion, kindness, and sympathy. She prayed for this particular moment. It was dark when she walked into her mother's room, which was next to her father's. A lone candle lit the room, but even as Hinata watched, a shadowy figure absently ran their hand over and through the flame. Hinata. The quiet voice called out, and said Genin sighed in relief. Come here. Her Sama was gorgeous, with long, dark, purple hair that she wore in a bun at times and loose at others. She had fair skin, thin eyebrows, as the ancient aristocracy sometimes wore them, and a long, sleeved purple kimono. She resembled Hinata except for the pale, sunken features of her face and the evil scar that ran down the left side of her face. She was dressed and groomed daily by attendants, and even now the woman frequently had days like that. When instructed to place her streaked face between the woman's hands, the younger, more saner Hyuga approached the bed where her Sama lay, and the woman held both of her cheeks for a brief moment, grinning softly, before bringing one hand back and giving Hinata a hard slap across the face. As the woman screamed at her daughter, Hinata collapsed back in shock, clutching a stinging cheek, her pained insanity erasing all of her intelligence. "Don't cry. For a Hyuga. No crying. Did I cry, do you think? Do you think I cried when my brother died?" Naomi asked, her laughter booming with craziness. "When my parents were brought back in pieces. No, I battled. I questioned the status quo and devoted myself to something bigger than the Hokage could ever be. I refused to let them beat me. With the Hyuga's blood in my veins, I demonstrated my strength to them, ultimate strength." She was smacked again, this time on the top of her head. "You dumb kid. You shame our ancestors with your frailty." The woman then launched herself at Hinata, and even though Naomi had long since lost the mental capacity to train as a shinobi, the insane woman was still bigger and more vicious than her daughter. The smaller Hyuga was hit with blows, and the mother was slapped, punched, and kicked as the malevolent madness caused her to act in ways she would never have when she was sane. She wasn't entirely sure anymore, but the woman was screaming, or perhaps that was Hinata. Rushing footsteps and the sensation of recognizable arms, Otou Sama, cradling her against a firm chest were present, but she was unable to focus due to the thoughts racing through her head. "If that's true of me, why isn't it true of you?" went through her mind, recalling Choji's comment about her praising his skill. I'll show you all," Hinata thought, her gaze shifting to the blonde Jinchuriki of Konoha. No more tears. No more sadness. That night, Naruto had a dream in which Mito appeared. With Uchiha Yusu's mutilated body, this dream picked up where the previous one left off. Mito took one of the blackened, burned hands in her own and held it to her forehead while crying. "A flash, Mito?" Tobirama asked, his tone full of perplexity. Panic gripped her as she spanked, holding a kunai. Tobirama? He must have sensed it when the marker was deactivated and had another in the room itself. Damn. She hadn't even considered checking to see if he'd left a Hiraishin marker in the seal matrix in her haste, grief ruling her. "Why are you in this place?" the Hokage questioned sharply. Mito paused. "You know technically Hashirama, as the former Hokage, has a right to know you were intruding here." Mito frowned at her brother.in.law, unimpressed, as the threat hung heavy in the air. However, she had been caught hovering over the body of a traitor to Konoha and breaking and entering a classified facility that should only be accessible by 2 shinobi in the village. The truth was the only way out of this situation. "Do you recall all those years ago when I was expecting a child from another man?" Breathlessly, the Uzumaki asked. Her brother.in.law had once joked that he had needed a jutsu that could keep up with his mind when talking about his development of the Hiraishin no Jutsu, Flying Thunder God technique. Mito had never completely doubted the truth of that, and she could see that sharp intelligence now, flickering in his eyes as he looked between Mito and her daughter. "You're sure?" Tobirama only asked, and the gentleness of his tone conveyed the empathy that only she and his brothers had ever been able to extract from him. In spite of herself, she thought, "There's a reason he's my closest friend." "I'm sure." Mito nodded. "Kagami, mine, too. And Uzumaki Atsushi is the third. He was unknowingly adopted by my brother." The Raijin, Thunder God, halted abruptly and raised an eyebrow in inquiry, saying, "You and Izuna?" With a slight wince, Mito said, "Madara, actually." Astonished, Tobirama flinched backwards and said, "What?" "In Oni no Kuni, Land of Demons, there was a mission," she said. "It was roughly 6 months before our wedding, a few years after I first met you in Hashirama." Though the marriage contract had never been dissolved, Hashirama had been thrust into a position as Senju clan head at a young age, with his father, aunts, and uncles all killed in the battle at Amaterasu no Tani, Valley of Amaterasu. By that time, the threat of the marriage contract was looming. My father had been pushing for months, and Hashirama was beginning to buckle under the pressure. Fortunately, she had a few years of respite for a brief period of time. "I was to wed a stranger, an idiot." Tobirama snorted at the remark and grinned. "The mission was to protect the priestess of Oni no Kuni from attacks as she was getting ready to give birth, but her people were unaware that the Uzumaki and Uchiha were at odds, with such a great geographical distance separating us, Mito added. I didn't want the contract, her brother.in.law nodded, already aware of this. Following a rather violent first encounter, Madara and I reluctantly decided to put up with one another in order to complete the mission. He was something else. I'd never seen such a freely emotive Uchiha, and it intrigued me. I saw him tending to his summons, and the compassion with which he handled them startled me. She exhaled. We'd been raised to consider the Uchiha as demons, as something broken and wrong, locked in a cycle of hatred forever. But there, tending to his hawks, stood the contradiction. Tobirama remarked, so you grew close to him, Mito chuckled. She fell into the memories of conversations and spars, of sardonic banter and battles of wits. It was difficult. But the mission was long, 3 months, waiting for the priestess to give birth. And we saw much of each other during that time. And at some point, it had evolved into something more, full of long nights, playful jabs, and kisses and smiles. Mito came to, blushing slightly, as the Hokage cleared his throat awkwardly. The mission came to a close, and we went our separate ways. The short and long of it would be most diplomatic, perhaps. I wed Hashirama 3 months later, in January of 18 DWS. But 5 months later, on my birthday, I found myself sneaking into the Uchiha clan's current stronghold. So began a habit that spanned 9 years. Tobirama's forehead furrowed. Every birthday? Mito gave a nod. Madara's too, but what about when you fell pregnant, with Shikako? When she said, nothing happened that time, for the first time in so many years, since her grandfather's passing, tears of frustration had seeped out. Madara held me, and we talked. Mito had been enraged and afraid of becoming a mother to a daughter whose father she did not know. However, Mito had been relieved when Shikako, with Hashirama's brown, black hair and a cheerful disposition, had been born. And then, 5 years later, I fell pregnant with the triplets. It's neither a question nor an accusation. You left them at the clan compounds. Just a declaration. The redhead laughed abruptly, with a sound of disbelief. Yes. Yes, I did. Atsushi had the Uzumaki hair, but the other two had that telltale Uchiha hair that was evidently inherited from neither myself nor Hashirama. Mito gave Tobirama a gentle smile and said, that man, that impossible brother of yours. He offered to keep them, you know, raise them as his own. She never went to see Madara again, and she said, I think that was when I began to fall in love with him. That was the only requirement, the only guideline Hashirama had put in place. I'll be the husband I should have been, he had promised, as though it were his fault rather than merely an unfortunate situation. You'll be my wife, too. Forever, just the two of us. And it had been and would be. Now, there was nothing more she desired. Mito's eyes shifted to the body of her daughter. All right, nearly nothing. And Izuna adopted the twins you left with the Uchiha. Quiet. It choked their conversation as it filled the room. She was aware that he wouldn't tell anyone and wouldn't betray her in that way. For as long as they had known one another, Tobirama and Mito had also been trusted. Thick as thieves. Hashirama was correct when he had previously called them. Tobirama asked softly, gesturing hazily to Mito, who was kneeling next to the coffin, you did this when Madara died, didn't you? Mito nodded. The Uzumaki stroked the charred hair that was still on top of Yusu's head and said, yes. My youngest daughter, she mused, and pictures of a squalling baby appeared in her head. She had left 2 baskets and a note at the entrance to the Uchiha clan compound, marking the only time they had ever spent together as mother and daughter. I have let you down. She bore a son. No, Mito shook her head, resisting the urge to shout it into the sky and say, yes. I couldn't. Tobirama gave a nod, briefly placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and then quickly disappeared again. That's when Mito finally broke down and started crying. Following his encounter with Inoichi, Naruto found himself lost in Konoha and needed some time to work out his personal issues. He had never been able to feel it before, but now he could. The unenviable hatred and gnawing madness that characterized the Kyuubi. In order to contain its darkness, his Ka, Chan and Uba, Chan had given up their lives and the sanctity of their souls. Now that he could hear it, the relentless malice praised a song of death and despair in a whisper to him. Something strong that should never again see the light of day was entering through the gate as the seal was disintegrating, separating at the seams. Uzumaki Naruto decided at that point. He refused to tell anyone that the seal was breaking. He was unable to inform anyone. They would act against him out of fear and panic. Even the Sandame, Jiraiya, and Tsunade would think he was lost and under the beast's control, while his teammates would turn against him and the other genin would think he was the demon. As Iruka had clarified, he would turn into the very Bakagitsune, monster fox, that he was not. He was unable to reveal the truth to them or the intensity of his hatred. Observe how the beast was transforming him and how it controlled him. He welcomed the possibility that the solution to the broken seal might be inside, and the memories came more quickly than ever before. Mito, a woman so skilled at fuinjutsu that she had sealed a biju within herself, and his mother, a strong seal's mistress. No, he was going to handle this alone. Unfortunately, the young Uzumaki was blissfully ignorant of the fact that Mito had been a paranoid and trustworthy woman in her younger years. Only Madara and Hashirama's love was able to truly transform her from the harsh and broken person she had become from years of keeping secrets and believing she could trust anyone. He was being tempered by those negative emotions, which were leading him down a path that could potentially endanger the world. He ignored the locals as he strolled through Konoha's streets, looking into stores as he went, until he came across the Yamanaka flower shop. Naturally, most people wouldn't know that Mito had been a real green thumb. Given her husband's Keke Genkai, it made sense, and once they grew closer, they truly relished the straightforward joy of gardening together. It's funny to note that Uzumaki Atsushi, her son by Madara, and Kushina and her son Naruto shared a fondness for gardening. The young blonde was dragged toward the store's front door by the weight of a whole family of gardeners. A bewildered voice behind the counter said, "Naruto," and his startled eyes lifted to look at Ino. "Ino-chan," he exclaimed with a smile. She raised an inquisitive eyebrow and asked, "What are you doing here?" He gave a shrug. "I've always liked gardening." Ino gave a snort. "You've come to the right place." They sat there talking about Hai no Kuni's native plants for more than an hour. Naruto explained the recently acquired structure that was used as the Senju clan estate after the Kyuubi destroyed the original. He described the colors of his current residence with particular care, and the girl excitedly dragged him around the store to find new plants to use to adorn the estate's grounds. Somehow, they ended up in the middle of a furious dispute over which flower colors were more lovely. Opposing cries of orange and purple reverberated throughout the store, but the conversation lacked genuine passion. Ino asked a relevant question while she was ringing up her fellow blonde's purchases. "Hey," said the Yamanaka abruptly. "Do you have any idea why Hinata was running through the village like there was a demon chasing her, yesterday?" Naruto grimaced at the statement's veracity. "That might have been me." Ino frowned, as though she was perplexed by the prospect of him being involved in such a regrettable affair. "I don't know what you could have done to her. She was crying buckets. I've never seen her that upset before. I tried catching up with her but the guards of the Hyuga clan compound wouldn't let me in." Naruto let out a sigh. "Yeah, I've had a really bad week. Between Iruka Sensei and, you heard about the assassination attempt?" He continued with a nod. "I got injured pretty badly during training with Sasuke, and that combined with some other things I've got going on right now to really stress me out. I channeled that chakra, and then suddenly Hinata was there and I exploded at her. I shouldn't have," he continued, as she looked skeptical, "but it kinda became too much, you know. Perhaps it was the old affection, which made her think of the older Naruto, or the fact that he appeared to be truly sorry, which he was. But all of a sudden, there was another understanding in her eyes that made him uneasy and unfamiliar. A somberness that was unsuitable for the Ino Naruto had become more intimately acquainted with in recent months after years of acquaintance in the academy. "Explain to me. What did Hinata do that set you off?" Even though they hardly knew one another, a part of him whispered that this was stupid and that he shouldn't explain himself to her. However, a loud, deafening voice that defied logic was drowning out that portion of him, accompanied by an unnamable force. Yelling, pleading with him to talk to someone. So he gave an explanation. He said what he could scarcely put into words, being careful to express only his feelings about Hinata and the circumstances surrounding her. Ino nodded as she filled in the details, the extra stressors concealed from the Uzumaki. He brought up Hinata's own admission, the stalking, and her minor contribution to his loneliness. He waited patiently until the very end to comment, and the blonde girl sighed when he was done. Her voice was clinical and cold, speaking with expertise in a field she knew well. Emotions in the mind. You felt vulnerable. Weak, at a time when you already felt like you had no power or control. Your survival instincts kicked in. You were scared, because you felt your trust was violated and that you weren't safe. The idea that he hadn't even dared to confront, much less try to explain, made Naruto wince in embarrassment. "Yes." Ino gave a nod. She rolled her shoulders in an odd gesture before staring firmly at Naruto. "I can see where you're coming from. It was a sudden response because of the immense stress you'd been under. And it would be painful to know you'd spent so much of your life alone, and someone could have done away with some of that loneliness, but chose not to. But you can understand how someone might fear rejection. Especially someone as timid as Hinata. And your rather explosive reaction frightened her, and was totally unacceptable and, to be frank, malicious. Sheepishly, Naruto rubbed the back of his neck and nodded. He was just regaining his emotional equilibrium, so it was unspoken that he wasn't sure he could handle the entire emotional turmoil just yet. I intend to apologize to Hinata when I see her. But I don't want to bring the whole thing back up tonight, when we have such a big day tomorrow. When she said, I'm going to hold you to that. The girl smiled back at Naruto as he nodded. Don't worry, I'm going to set this right. With a nod, the Yamanaka resumed his task of figuring out the cost of his purchases. It's a shame, though. You'd have made a really cute couple. Naruto gave an owlish blink. What? Ino moaned. Oh come on. That's why she was following you around all the time. She fancies you, you dolt. A slight flush came over Naruto. And he wasn't, really. I'm not really used to that kind of thing. Mito's relationship with Madara had been a crime of passion, and she had married Hashirama through an arrangement. Suddenly, they had transformed into something else. Kushina, who had been lusting for Minato for 3 days before the Lady Boy asked her out, was also of no assistance. He blushed so much and stammered so badly that he should have been mistaken for a tomato. Ino gave him a sympathetic glance. Unfortunately, the Yamanaka went on, it's been hard for you, and I'm truly, deeply sorry for the way I might have made that worse. He gave her a questioning eyebrow lift. He smiled and said, Nah, you haven't done anything, Ino. She rolled her eyes in amusement. We both know that's not entirely true, Baka. But still, she replied. She reached across and rapped a playful knuckle on the top of his skull, which the younger blonde rubbed painfully. We need to clear the air here, and I don't just mean the empty void in your head, she said. So, what do you want exactly? The perplexed Uzumaki inquired. Can we just, Ino said softly as she trailed off, can we start anew? A blank slate? Naruto nodded slowly, as though he was thinking, and blinked. Then he gave her a smile. I'd like that, you know. Ino returned his smile. He waved to Ino as he walked out of the store, thinking with satisfaction, turns out Mito. Oba was right. I always had the support of my comrades. They'd better, too. Tomorrow was the start of the Chunin exams. Tsunade stalked slowly through the academy building's halls, refusing to let her horror fuel a panic attack. From this point on, every action she took, both symbolic and literal, had the potential to end their entire campaign against Danzo and his collaborator. Finally, Tu altered and changed to retain any recollection of her time with her grandfather and great-uncle. She walked into the Hokage's office to discover Sarutobi sitting behind his desk, working with the Anbu commander on a scroll. After giving Tsunade a stern look and observing the gravity on her face, he gave the commander the order to exit the room. Tsunade sent an Anbu to summon Jiraiya, who came in through the window as the man was doing so. This time, she didn't even feel the need to kick him out the window again. She had located it. One possibility from her ancestors' articles, one jutsu. Something subtle, something that can be easily concealed, something that can brainwash on this scale. Tobarama. Uji's papers on mind. Control, the peril and strength of a single technique that had nearly driven Konohagakure to the verge of civil war, were filled with warning after warning. Calmly and quietly, Tsunade requested that Sarutobi guard the office. There was a single hand sign, the windows and doors slammed shut, and then... Koto Amatsukami, she exclaimed, gasping for air as she couldn't contain the realization any longer. Sarutobi gasped, as though the technique's name alone had evoked memories. Maybe they did, and maybe this was the epiphany Tobarama Uji spoke of, when the victim realized how foolish they had been. Uji had explained the dojutsu technique in a subtle way. Though cunning and dangerous, it has one fundamental flaw. It is unable to replicate the logical patterns of its victims. If you point out the irrationality of their altered perception, they will at least realize something. Of course, the ultimate genjutsu of Uchiha Yusu, and her great-nephew Uchiha Shisui, Sarutobi rasped out while holding his head in pain. Wait, what? Jiraiya said, bewildered. What's going on here? After a brief moment of triumphant huffing, Tsunade felt the burden of the situation once more. Among the annals of my ancestors, I found a treatise by Tobarama Uji on mind. Control techniques, on the danger of them, and how they needed to be regulated. And of course, Jiraiya interrupted with a humorous tone, the majority of those came from the Yamanaka and Uchiha clans, of which your great uncle was not particularly fond. The Senju nodded and rolled her eyes. Admittedly, I thought he'd been biased in choosing his subject matter, but Tobarama Uji was rather anally retentive when it came to fair, unbiased recording. He was quite analytically minded. There's a reason he got along so well with the Shimura clan. In any case, the Sandame interrupted. You discovered references to the incident involving Uchiha Yusu in those records. Jiraiya inquired inquisitively. Uchiha Yusu? I think I vaguely remember that name from the history books. She was a kunoichi of the Uchiha clan, born to Uchiha Izuna, stated Sarutobi. Here, the shinobi no kami, god of shinobi, appeared truly saddened. She and her twin brother, Uchiha Kagami, were left orphaned following the second, last Uchiha versus Senju skirmish. When Izuna died, they were temporarily adopted by their uncle, Madara, with whom Yusu was quite close. I remember Madara well from my own childhood during the formation of the village. She was furious when she left Konoha and harbored a deep-seated hatred for the village and its residents, including her own clan. Her contempt for everyone, including her own brother, was well known. But eventually, her animosity became action. She had awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan, the most dreadful of the Uchiha techniques, at some point. One of her skills was Koto Amatsukami, the ultimate genjutsu, which she employed to terrifying effect. You still haven't told me what Koto Amatsukami is, Jiraiya said reluctantly, already fearing the power of such a technique. Anything with the moniker, ultimate, was sure to be dangerous. It's a mind control technique of the highest caliber, Tsunade said in response. After all, Tsunade thought, the ethics or morals of the victim have always been a major challenge to overcome, in the art of mind control. Even the Yamanaka were known to struggle with forcing someone to betray their fundamental beliefs. Jiraiya paled significantly at her words, the horror of such a jutsu dawning on him. Sarutobi sighed. Uchiha Naka, a member of the Hokage's guard, was brainwashed against the village by Yusu using Koto Amatsukami when she finally made the decision to act in defiance. She changed him completely, and the changes in Naka's character might not have been resolved if his wife, Uchiha Naori, hadn't been there. As it stands, he was almost killed, attacking Uchiha under his own conceived orders of the Senju regime. He slaughtered dozens of people within the Uchiha clan estate, and it was only the intervention of Naori that saved him. She managed to utilize a kinjutsu of her own creation to return him to the person he once was. From there, Naka fought alongside Kagami, Naori and the Naidame himself to bring Yusu to justice. When Tsunade said, "Wait, Sarutobi Sensei," she frowned. "You said the technique of Uchiha Yusu and Uchiha Shisui. Who the hell is he?" Hiruzen's eyes widened as he realized. A masked kunoichi moved quickly through High no Kuni's trees in the direction of her target's house. Naruto Uzumaki. The news that another Uzumaki had won the Kongo Fusa, especially so quickly, had her leader ecstatic. Last time, they had lost their chance because the girl was turned into the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki before they could obtain her, but this time, unless something happened again, they had a chance. To be honest, she was concerned about it. They had been afraid that the Kongo Fusa had gone extinct when they learned of the Uzumaki woman's death in the Kyuubi attack, and they had no way of starting the revival. But they could do it now. In addition to learning more about the boy, her goal was to acquire the object. It might start from there. Masanori Sama would get up again.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.